All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session finishing up the general government operating budget and reviewing the utilities, enterprise budgets, and legislative program. Let's go ahead and start with introductions, starting on this side.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne France.
John Weddleton.
Felix Rivera.
Austin
Great.
Davidson.
Pete Peterson.
Mike Zalatow. Sorry.
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
Brett Dyson.
Lance Wilbur, management budget.
All right. Lance, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have the next 4 hours scheduled together to finish up the review of the general government operating and capital budgets for those departments that have capital programs, and then the utilities and enterprises. Our schedule will be, we're going to start off for about the first couple hours talking, looking at the departments we were not able to get to from the October 18th meeting. You should have a revised packet. The slide deck for parks through purchasing is the exact same that you got last week. Just this time I put a couple pages on, a couple slides on each page for them. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll finish up from IT through internal audit. That shouldn't take very long. And then we'll take a lunch break around 1 o'clock, and then we'll start with Anchorage Community Development Authority, and then we'll finish with the MLMP on the enterprise around 3 o'clock. So depending on your interest, I think that we will be able to get through this, because most of these departments, at least after the first break, I don't think there's really not a lot of changes. So we'll do it the same format if you'd like, Mr. Chairman. Is if the department comes up, the slide comes up, you guys can ask questions. We'll do our best to address. We have responses for probably 80% of the questions you asked last Friday. They were due yesterday, and O&B is reviewing those before we compile them and send them out. I think we might have 1 or 2 that are going to take a little bit longer, but we'll add them on. We'll get them to you as soon as we can. All right?
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Dyson.
maybe my records are incomplete, but I think what was posted was that this was the utilities. Is that correct?
It was utilities, but also the continuation of general government, and then the utilities.
And that was posted?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll start off with Parks and Recreation, and again, the format, not to reiterate too much of what we talked about. Remember, the top half of these slides, this is a continuation for every department. Every department will have one of these, except for ACDA. They're a little bit different, but every department will lead off with this. So in Parks and Recreation, in 2019, in the approved budget, they had almost more than $309,000 for housing and homelessness initiative cleanup. And then during the first quarter budget revisions, the Assembly added $150,000, and then we had another $23,000 that we added into that. So those were one-time hits for camp cleanup. The East High Pool, as a cost, the cost to actually support the East High Pool in 2019, that expense was reduced because the East High Pool during the earthquake was damaged, so the pool wasn't in operations. So we took that 138 out, and then for a continuation, we'll show that that money gets added back in to support East High's pools. And then the settlement that we had there, that was related to this judgment settlement we had down at the Girdwood Forest Fair. So that's
Related to what?
the Girdwood Forest Fair. We had an individual who wanted to do a religious expression at the Girdwood Forest Fair. They filed a suit. We settled with them that they could.
Their suit was for being excluded?
Yes. The sign, if you have not been to the Forest Fair, says, I think, no politicians, no religions, and no dogs or something. And anyway, that violated what they wanted to do. They filed a suit against us. We settled with them for $44,000.
So they didn't go to court?
Correct.
And so there's no policy direction for us that we've got to obey in the future in terms of who can present?
I do believe there is, and I will defer to the attorney. I'll get some information from Rebecca.
Yeah, at some point that'd be good to know.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the debt service, this is for Parks and Rec bonds, and it's basically the bond debt that they have. And then on some changes that we have, that they have some adjustments in their salaries, and then adjustments in their fleet that we're making for all departments. And then the last thing is the changes that we're making. Obviously, there's voter-approved bond debt from the 19 bonds that we're adding in. And then, as we talked about in the police department and in the health department previously, the one-time expenses for homeless camp cleanup have been one-time events. And so the proposed budget has a permanent 14 seasonal positions inside Parks and Recreation from April through October that would continue that program for next year. And then related to the Ben Boeke and Dempsey Anderson arenas, and my apologies, it says SNB, it's SNG is the contractor who manages that. And so basically we have an agreement with SNG to manage those facilities. The contract stipulates that depending on the events that occur, if there is not enough revenue in the events that they hold, the contract states that we actually as a municipality have to make them whole as a result of that contract. And that contract is, and Mr. Schutte could probably address that, or Josh could too, about how that contracts. But that 80,000 is the anticipated deficit that we're going to get in the for operating in Dempsey and Beckville. Is that related to the contract? I think it is, yeah. So on their operating side, the big news for Parks and Rec is the addition of the 14 people that'll be full-time for camp cleanup. And so when you look at the position count in the municipality, this is the bulk of it.
Okay, I have a few questions for you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And do we have an estimate of what the cost to fix the east pool is? And is there a plan to fix that pool?
It's Anchor School District.
So the answer, the question was the cost to fix East. It's the cost estimates being from the school district. We can find out from Mr. Peterson, but they're also looking to FEMA to actually help them with the reimbursement of that. But we'll find out the cost for you.
So we're going to wait to find out if FEMA's going to reimburse some of that before they fix it?
I will find out what the school district's going to do. I don't know their plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
A couple. So on this, the judgment Girdwood, two things. I thought it was like 50,000. Might be wrong, something like that. But why would that go to Parks and Rec?
Because it happened inside a parks facility.
And that's how you just, so it happened there, and they're the ones who have to cough up.
We have a judgment. Most of the other, they land in the department.
So, and then what is this hotel motel tax? Did you address that?
So there's three departments that give an expense to hotel motel. So they go into the convention center fund, and there's three of them. Most of it goes into Chris Schutte's department. There's a very small portion Parks and Rec contributes into that fund, and then there's a larger portion that goes into the maintenance and operations. So let's see if I have a note here. Yeah, it's a contribution to the convention center. It's a convention center fund. It's not only just the building, but that's Parks' contribution to that. I could get more detail for you, Mr. Weddleton.
Maybe as a help to the chair, it's not just the hotel motel tax that supports the convention center. There are also two, in the ordinance, there are two fees that escalate based on CPI that together amount to an additional roughly $1 million that also goes into that debt service fund outside of the hotel motel tax.
So it says hotel motel tax, but really we should think of it as contribution to the Denina.
No, so the hotel motel tax is one source of funds, but outside of that, from the municipality itself, we out of our general budget that started at $1 million and now is up to 1.1 or 2 something also into the debt service fund as an additional supplement to the debt service fund.
And we track it in three places. Parks is a little bit, maintenance and operations is I think like 70 or 80,000, and then in Office of Economic and Community Development it's almost all balanced.
Okay, I don't want to pull the whole meeting on this. My understanding is that 4% increase to the bed tax was to finance.
I can pull the code for you.
And that was
shows
supposed to, okay.
There is.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to see that. That'd be good education. Then, if I can, Vice Chair.
You may continue.
He's just the chair.
So we have, the very last line here, the Ben Bogey 80,000, which is good, because we coughed up a whole lot more before, but, so in your scheme here, though, it seems like you're pulling out one-time things, and then you may add in
Yes.
later. So why didn't you pull out the one-time $250,000 that we paid last, for this current year or something?
And I think the $250,000 that we paid,
Thanks.
yeah.
So, through the chair, for Director of Economic and Community Development, because there wasn't one in 2019.
We didn't cough up more?
Not for the Ben Bokeh, Dempsey Anderson Ice Arenas. So, that facility typically operates either break even or at a slight profit to the operator. And so the operating expenses of 2019 are exceeding the revenues. That's why we budgeted in 2020, because we paid the previous year's losses. So this year, they're not having a stellar year, but in previous years, you haven't seen it because we haven't had a budget.
Oh, okay, so 18 they did well, so nothing this year. You didn't have a resolution congratulating them? We should do that. That's big news. We want to hear that stuff.
That's okay. I can create my things.
And even 80,000 now, I think, gosh, that's great. Okay, great, perfect.
But just to be clear, this is for the ice arenas, not for the Sullivan Arena.
Right.
The ice arenas are much smaller historically.
Oh, so we get to see Sullivan, you just continued the...
Sullivan was in my budget. We did it at the last work session. The ice arena net operating deficits, if they have to be paid, come out of Parks and Rec, because they are former Parks and Recreation facilities that are now just general facilities.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Constant, did you have
Thank
a
you.
question?
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit here, the SMG contract, a little bit there, the SMG contract. Here's my question on that. What methods do we use to ensure fidelity so that they're not coming up with some very generous losses for themselves?
Through the chair, so generous losses for themselves just means break even for themselves technically. The way the contracts work is they front all of the cash for operating all of our facilities that they manage themselves. And the net operating deficits, if there are any at some of the facilities, are paid back to them just to make them whole.
But
so
isn't that possibly
funding their net operating deficits?
Isn't that possibly a
breaking
profit center though? Like
No.
loss leading, kind of pushing losses into a certain place that we have to pick up? I don't know, just
No,
fidelity.
but to your point of managing the contract manager, we not only have complete control over budget approval, we also have in the operating agreements there are metrics they have to meet to satisfy the terms of that agreement, and they have done a good job of, even in tough times, staying within those confines. It just so happens we're in a downturn. Now, specific to the ice arenas, I will add that I think 19 will be an operating loss. I don't expect the same for 20 because there's an active effort right now, Josh and I are part of, with all of the ice user groups to reorient what's known as the ice allocation policy, how we divvy it out to the different clubs, et cetera. We think we have landed on a more equitable solution to that will see more ice time booked. Additionally, we're looking at changing our previously rigid ice pricing model to a dynamic one so that as SMG sees gaps in ice bookings, they can drop the rates and suddenly other people can be interested in it, meaning less downtime on any ice and more utilization.
And the concern is not so much on the small contracts, but the big ones. And thank you for that answer.
Sure.
It's certainly something I would like to be mindful of. It's,
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Concept. We have one more question from Ms. Zalato.
Yep, thanks. Is there, this is probably Mr. Sheedy, but is there like a master planning process for these facilities, and, you know, or something that we have like a kind of a cohesive plan? Because we do see them operate at deficits so that we can kind of judge against what we're trying to achieve and then what's actually happening.
Yeah, through the chair. So each of the facilities have a management agreement that we enter into with the successful bidder, whoever that is. This happens to be SMG. And as part of that management agreement or contract, there are buffers as to what they can and can't do. Some of those are protective buffers that regulate how much their revenue and/or expenses can swing before they are considered disqualified. But then some of them are actual performance measures like increasing the number of attendance activities, ICE activities, et cetera.
Thank you.
Related to that as well, and this is in the next slide, there's also a capital plan for each of these facilities separate from the operations.
Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Zalato. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you. And so the dynamic, your pricing you're talking about, are you reducing the ice time rental fees if it's like later at night or real early in the morning to try to get those times booked or something? Or
Yeah, through the chair, I don't know that we've identified any specific times or days of the week, but the model could be implemented on the fly by the manager when they see those gaps. A lot of this ice gets booked months, even half a year in advance, so they can see it coming.
all right, thank you.
All right, moving on to capital. For Parks and Recreation, in the proposed 2020 bonds, these are the capital projects that the Parks Department is proposing. A lot of the projects look pretty similar to the same as they'd had last year. And I think, there's a lot of lighting, there's some safety, there's signage, there's repaving, there's some parking lot improvements, there's trail improvements, and playground equipment all across the municipality. So if you have, and I think that the last meeting I passed out a little bit more detail about the capital projects. And on that sheet, I passed out when we did PM&E. The parks projects are the first page. If you want a little bit more detail about which phase is going on for each one of these, you can look at that, or obviously Josh can respond to that, or we can get back to
Mr. Dyson?
Mr. Shooty, where in this budget does any money we pay for use of the dome? Is it show up in this budget?
Through the chair, we don't pay to use the dome. The dome is not ours, it's a privately owned facility.
And so okay, so we don't, all right, so we're not financing or paying rent or anything.
No, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. I think for Dyson School District, right? Pay some for the phone. Is that what you're thinking? Look at these capital improvement things. It would be nice to know if you have a number. There's so much work done by volunteers that Beth Norland's group does. Do you have any kind of tally on the value of that?
Through the chair, we do generate a report annually, and I can definitely share that. There's a lot of that does go through the Park Foundation, but we also have a dedicated volunteer coordinator within Parks and Recreation, and we track every hour, and we do put a value to that, and I think it typically comes in around 900,000 annually.
Those single track trails at Hillside, the stuff I'm using is volunteer made. This is incredible.
In addition to that, there's a lot of volunteer hours that happen out there that are not tracked, but we try to do our best to track it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the planning department. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Elizabeth. So for the planning department, in 2019, one of the things that we did in the planning department, and we were looking at a variety of departments to reduce their budget. So what Michelle had asked us to do, and we agreed to, and what was reflected in the budget is, in 2019, we did not fund a position in their department, a senior planner position, with the at the point in time that in 2020 we would bring that position back into the department. And there's a couple other, I think one or two other departments where we did this, where basically a director said, look, I know that we're looking to meet some reductions for a one-time. Normally, the one-time things are things we add in. In the planning department, it was a one-time thing we took away. And so in 2020, we're going to put it back in. And that's why it shows as a positive there, and a change. And then, just simple salary and benefit adjustments due to the AMEA, mostly AMEA, non-reps contracts in there. Other than that, there was no other service changes or programs or plans proposed in the budget. So pretty simple for the planning department.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
On Tuesday, we approved a fairly large increase in fees for the building department. And the home builders have said one of the things they have trouble with there is that some of those funds are not going to the building department, but are going towards long-range planning. And So I'm just telling you what they told me. I haven't seen it. I'm not aware. So the question: does that happen? Has it happened?
To my knowledge, I have never seen it come in from department. So no, I do not believe that you confirm.
I can speak a little bit to that, through the chair. I want to say close to a decade ago, there was a portion of 181 fund money transferred out of the fund into 101 that was then applied to the Hillside District Plan, actually.
Well, it was money well spent, but they're talking well, maybe. But they were talking about that particular, if you have any indication of how they may have gotten that idea, that would be helpful to me, because that's one of their anchor points on those fee increases.
Bob, we'll get to that. We're gonna let you steal
Yeah,
his
that could
thunder
wait
here when we get
if
to
you
it.
want to address it at any
Yeah.
time.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
Yes, channeling Mr. Trainee. I think in this calendar budget year, we put on board the building official. Yeah, let the record reflect, they nodded yes. And
She's sitting right over there.
Different department, right?
And so, so then we're continuing that salary. And that wasn't position eliminated.
That will be in development services, not in the planning department. That will be in development services when we get to it. And if I'm nodding the wrong way,
No. All right.
Bob will correct me.
Yeah, let the record reflect, Mr. Trainee's smiling.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, real estate. If I do this quick, we can get it done before Robin sits down. So in real estate is a department like Mr. Schuette's and Mr. Falsey's, where they have a 80+% of their entire budget is in non-labor. So of that $8 million that's set up there, roughly $7 million of that, about $7 million of that goes to lease payments. Lease payments for this building, the permit center, and the other buildings that the municipality leases, whether it be for APD or traffic or wherever it might be, for storage or regular operation. So primarily, most of Robin's budget is in the lease payments. She does have some small adjustments in salaries. One of the things that in the lease payments that we have done this year that we had not done in the past is that when we asked departments to make sure that they had any contractual obligations, lease payments, software increases that automatically were required as part of contracts we had already signed that go into next year. In Robin's case, it's almost all lease payments. I mean, the lease agreements that we've signed for multiple years, they have an increase into them. We built that into this budget. In Robin's case, in the past, when we asked her to adjust those things, then probably was a time 3, maybe 5 years ago she could do that, but right now she can't do that. And frankly, we've made a policy call that she shouldn't be doing that. And so we've added $80,000 in. That's going to be reflective of the rate increases for real estate. The other thing is that the real estate director, the funding due to the chief housing officer, we have to add money into her budget to keep the chief housing officer position moving through 2020, and then some other labor adjustments that she has that are not related to continuation. So, and that's not unusual for Robin. That there's a couple other departments that have that as well. So,
All right. I have
she
a
does
few
not have a
questions.
capital program in here.
I'll start with Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Robin, what's the trajectory on the lease for this building? Timeline, like conversations about what the next step is?
We are starting those conversations. I think we have about 6 more years left on our lease.
6 more.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. I have 3 sort of interrelated questions for you and for Mr. Falsey. Phil. Okay, so the people of Anchorage in April approved a new sort of lease-to-buy tool.
Correct.
And I'm wondering if we have started to use it yet, or if there are any plans to.
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, the first time that we did use it was for the new APD acquisition. So ACDA actually owns it. We lease it back. We could have used it on that. I'm sorry. We could have used it had that been the case. Today, I don't believe that we have used it yet, but we are anticipating if there is an opportunity for other projects, including, just had a meeting with the school district, and there is, one may be opportunity for the school district to use it also. But it may be City Hall, maybe something like that.
Great. And so that is a good segue into my second question, which was about the APD headquarters.
Yes.
So, during the debate on that, one of our former members said, we're going to end up buying this building twice. And we still went forward with it because we wanted to act quickly. And it was a very good deal. But have we started to talk to ACDA? I mean, it's a sort of unique situation, right? Because ACDA is also sort of a creature of the municipality. Have we started to have serious conversations with ACDA about finding a way to purchase that building? Or have we decided that that is not something we want to do?
I think I'll,
Yeah, through the chair, the idea of purchasing or somehow transferring ownership of that building from ACDA to the municipality is something that we continue to discuss. I will say, though, honestly, it's not a near-term project. I don't think you're going to see us bring a lease purchase acquisition of that building anytime soon for a couple reasons. One, the financing that ACDA secured on their other facilities to pay cash for that building and own it. There's some defeasance expenses that would be incurred, et cetera. And so that's not a near-term project, but it is something that is actively in our thinking as we look ahead.
And then the last question that's related to both of those and goes to Mr. Constant's question as well. So I've advocated for a creative way, a broad definition of what debt means when it comes to the MLMP sale. That is, we can use revenue from the MLMP sale, according to what the Anchorage voters have authorized us to do, to defease the debts of the city. Are any of these leases essentially debts that are expensive enough that we would want to renegotiate or buy our way out of them using funds from the MLP? And has that been considered?
I think I'll.
Ona is raising her hand.
Through the chair, in order to qualify as debt, our bond counsel has to confirm that it actually is appropriate debt to be defeased. So in the meeting on October 30th, I believe we're going to go over the list of things that are eligible for this.
Okay.
And I would defer to Robin and Chris, but I don't know, aside from City Hall necessarily, any leases that are so out of line with what we would have to pay to purchase them that we would need to enact any of that. But whether or not it's eligible for MLMP, basically is what we've heard.
Okay, I've heard sort of conflicting reports on what the administration is considering spending MLP funds on, some of which are strictly debt, and some of which don't look like debt. This looks to me more like debt, or a broad definition of what I think the people of Anchorage would be comfortable us paying down if we're trying to make the city more self-sufficient. So if there is a punitive lease, or just a lease that, or we can renegotiate, use those funds and purchase a building, I think that that's a legitimate use. But that's my opinion.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Dixon.
I just want to remind us to not use acronyms. This is the worst. This last exchange was the worst I've heard in 2.5 years. That those initials, I was struggling to keep up on what they meant, and I think it was very poor communications.
Okay.
And
oh yeah, CDA. Fair enough.
All right. Thank you for that reminder, Mr. Dyson. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the lease facilities contract, so these are ongoing, and we just have like kind of escalators in our leases that just kind of, we have increases every year. That's how it works. Did I understand that correctly?
Through the chair, Ms. Zelto, that is exactly right. Many of them have CPI, so we don't know what they are until we actually get that.
Could you say what that is, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Consumer Price Index. So many of them are gauged to the Consumer Price Index. Many others are already built in with, say, a 3% increase or a 2% increase on an annual basis. So, yes, these are contractual over the term of a long-term lease.
So can we estimate, other than those with the Consumer Price Index, kind of what we're looking at, over the term of the lease for the increases, so we can estimate what the budget increase will be each year for your department?
That is correct. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
maybe got it straight, but I don't see why bond counsel, who I don't trust, why would bond counsel tell us what is in debt? I don't trust those people at all. They weren't in the ballot measure, and
Through the chair to Mr. Weldon, because they are legally the people who would defend the definition of what debt is, should we have to go to court because of it. But I understand your sentiment.
well, we're in a sorry state. So,
And to clarify, I will say that, to Mr. Dunbar's point, that what you will see as the list on the 30th will not be the things that the administration, the things that the administration supports. It will be everything that is eligible that we are aware of.
okay, thank you. So, a question that's relevant, sorry. So, and I feel bad because I think a lot of stuff I ask you is cost you money. Can you do this and that? Go buy access to you got State Park and so on. And I don't see a line item for that, which I would really like to see. But so you do things that you're selling wetlands credits, and you can sell property and so on. And you have your 5-year plan. So you're just kind of tracking what you think would happen in that 5-year plan, and that's how you're estimating your revenues. And you might sell some stuff, or is this thing, does it jump around a lot here?
Through the chair, Mr. Middleton, let me, first of all, let me tell you just a little bit about the real estate department. The real estate department is made up of two departments, two divisions. One is the real estate services department. That is the department that handles most of the general real estate leases. We handle the management. The revenues from general real estate, like most of our residential properties we've been selling and so on, that revenue comes in. That's tax support, that's 101 funds. That's where we do the foreclosure process, and we do our foreclosure sale if we have one. All of that goes through the real estate services side. The other side of our house is called the Heritage Land Bank, or HLB, and the Heritage Land Bank is a self-sustaining fund. So even though our, you'll see our budget numbers, our labor and so on is a combined budget, we do have capital funds, however, in our HLB 5-year, 1-year, and 5-year plan in that fund and budget that does have some capital projects for development preparation, for things like research or acquisition for the Chugach State Park access and so on. So you're not going to see that as a separate capital fund. You will see it in our 5-year and 1-year work plan for Heritage Land Bank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robin, quick question. In 2018, the revenue was about $500,000 higher than what's projected for 2020. Can you remind me what happened in 2018?
I would have to go back and look, but it probably was a fairly large sale of property. Over the last 5 years, we've sold, I think, 25 parcels. Some of them are larger parcels, some of them are smaller parcels. But the revenue comes directly into our department. So if it happens that we sold a fairly large parcel, or if we received mitigation credits that go into the Heritage Land Bank, that would be reflected in that. So it's just a one-time sale.
Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Okay, development services. All right, in the development services world, a couple things going on the operating side. Their budget from last year is about $11.5 million. The position count's not changing as they go in from 2019 to 2020. In development services, we added a one-time hit of money, about $100,000, so that they could sort of charge or prime the deteriorated property and abatement, with the plan that once those properties were abated, either the cost of the abatement would be recovered, or if they weren't recovered, then the ownership of the property and then the sale of the property, and that would then keep going to support the program. So in consultation with we verified that they would not be needing that another hit of money to keep that program alive. The program is going to be alive, but not with another hit of money here. And then they gave up, we got $100,000, and then Jack at Development Services reminded us that we have a big list, and the first ones we do are going to be super expensive. So we added another $70,000 in there in 19 in 1Q. And then the next piece is the benefits and salary adjustments for the entire department based on their labor contracts. no really changes there. I will remind the Assembly that this budget is based on the revenue adjustments for development services that you approved on Tuesday night. So the things that you reviewed on for the fee increases, we made in this proposed budget, we made an assumption that they would be included. And so thank you for your support on that. And I think other than the fees inside development services and the adjustments and the reasons why they wanted to make those, operationally, there's really no big changes going on in development services that I'm aware of, so, or at least as proposed. So that's all I have for their operating side.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Oh,
Did you want to?
I do, but I didn't get the great telepathic communication there. With code enforcement, is there any? Do we see any increase in fees from the trash ordinance, and are those built into the budget?
So the code enforcement, there's two types of code enforcement. Tel 23 we also call code abatement. There's no increase in fees there for like a demo fee or something. The other part of that being the land use code enforcement, not in that part of the budget. No, there is a slight increase for zoning reviews, which is kind of intertwined with code enforcement, but not for the inspections or the code enforcement activities out in the field.
That's sort of good and bad. Just to comment on that. When we passed it, we said this is not a revenue-generating vehicle, and so that's appropriate. On the other hand, I do think there are some bad actors in that first year or two of operation. You might see you'd see some increased fines, sorry, not fees, but fines until behavior changes.
At this point, you can levy fines and then you can collect fines. And there's usually a difference between those two, as we know. But at this point, we believe the budget is adequate to sustain the activities at the current level to support the community's needs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Similar question. It was just stated that the one-time requirements being taken out for the abatement interior property cleanup, that it's self-sustaining. What is the mechanism by which it has become self-sustaining?
So the mechanism there is, if we turn to the property, such as one on Francesca that we acquired, through the real estate department, who has escaped already, and then after that, we cleaned it up. When that property is sold, the proceeds from that will go back into that fund.
And is that enough? I guess what you're suggesting here is that is enough to move this project forward and start getting properties really cleaned up. Because I have a list, you have a list, everyone has a list of these properties, and it seems like it's kind of hard to get them moving. And I have constituents that are barking at me to get more support for code enforcement, code abatement, because we need more of this, not less of this. And what we're doing now is great, but it's not enough. And so are we, with what we have, able to steadily increase our response, or are we looking at a kind of flat level of engagement?
I see us doing not a sharp increase, but a gradual increase in our activities in terms of that money. Our staffing stays the same, and as big as you can have infinite staff, but there's still a procedural due process you owe a landowner before you do anything. That's probably where the greatest amount of time is that frustrates the neighbors, that we go out and start the process, we cite them, well, they get 10 days to correct it, then they get time to hear, the time to respond there. And that's where those delays are in there, and that there's a certain constitutional requirements. But other than that, I believe we have the staff, and they're finding ways to become more effective and efficient to do these things as they're going forward too, and learning some new areas and how to address it. But you're going to see a continuing increase in enforcement activity.
So one last nuance to the question, a slightly different question. Mr. Judy, I've been harassing him a little bit on kind of helping me, because I'm a representative of the public, to understand better how your positions work. When you look at the job lines, they don't describe the functions, right? When I look for code enforcement anywhere in the budget, there's no code enforcement officer anywhere. Instead, it's listed as some kind of engineer. Is it possible going forward we could get a primer on how to recognize the actual functions of your staff?
Through the chair, certainly. What's driving that are the position descriptions to meet the classifications for HR, human relations.
Right.
But we can certainly translate from HR speak into functional speak and prepare that primer for you.
It sure would help me to communicate to the public the investments being made and the things that they want. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. Am I right? Is code enforcement, does that include building safety code?
Through the chair, there's two different groups. There is code abatement, which is 3 officers that focus on dangerous buildings throughout the municipality. Then there is the code enforcement, which is Jack Frost team, which does the final zoning reviews when your neighbor puts a garbage dump in their yard, marijuana inspections, and the plethora. Unfortunately, those have some blend, but they're 2 distinct groups.
I think your answer to my question is no. It's not building safety.
Correct, it is no. It is 181 funded, it is outside of building safety funded.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Alato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the percent of construction inspections completed on the same day, which are impressive numbers. But with the addition of the thousands of earthquake inspections, I guess the question is, are you planning for your labor to come in on the budget? Because some of it talks about working extra hours on the weekdays and Saturdays.
So let me start, and then Bob can correct me if I'm wrong. When it comes to the activities related to the earthquake, whether it was extra inspections, and we had Bob's team go out and do earthquake, costs related to the earthquake, we asked them to track them separately outside in that earthquake fund, not in their operating budget. So when we get to the end of the year, this year, in Bob's department and a variety of others, those were earthquake expenses. We're going to be truing those up and figuring out, do we keep them in that earthquake fund? But right now, the mass amount of overtime that they would have had was related to, it's tracked in the earthquake fund. And he's not, if he is over budget because of that, we don't expect him to manage it to a lower number because we told him to do it, and we told him to do it with a separate set of money.
Okay, and the follow-up question to that, and you don't have to answer it now though, is, you did it still with the same number of inspectors, which is impressive, but I don't know if it would have just made more sense to hire additional inspectors if that would have been less expensive. Because I know with the earthquake expenses, some of it's a bit of a gamble in terms of what will be ultimately reimbursed or when.
Through the chair, the concern is what you give the constituent afterwards. First, you want staff that are trained after the rapid assessments in what's called ATC 120, which is a standard consistent inspection applied across the board. And second, you want something from an ICC certified inspector so it will hold up to go forward, that you're giving them good advice. Rather than contracting with folks on the fly with an expedient contract and not assuring that level of quality, we made a deliberate decision to eat a lot of overtime and have folks working weekends into June.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Rios, did you want to?
Yeah, just a quick question. If you could, in the section that says department goals that contribute to achieving the mayor's mission, you have in there 3 bullets under homelessness, reduce homelessness and improve community health. Can you just give me a little bit more information about how your department actually contributes to meeting the mayor's goals on homelessness?
Through the chair, I think the biggest way you see that is in providing quality, safe, affordable housing, and also taking actions for unsafe housing situations and finding solutions so that they can continue to occupy them. It would be real easy to come in with an iron fist and just put orders to vacate whenever we see an unsafe house. We find balances and solutions, though, so that you can take that house, work with an owner, get a code-compliant, safe facility. Handicap access is probably a great example. You have somebody who's aged in place and has a place with unsafe egress because their stairs, they need a wheelchair and they have a flight of stairs. We can work with the landowner to find the means to keep them in that place rather than sending them to doing just an order to vacate, sending them to Brother Francis.
So you see yourself more on the prevention end?
On the prevention and also homelessness, it has to be safe as well. Safe prevention and finding solutions.
All right, thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob, appreciate your comments about due process because I too receive feedback from constituents saying we need more code enforcement officers to speed up the response process. And my question is along the lines of what Mr. Constant was asking about the number of positions that are focused on, or which ones are focused on code enforcement. So out of the 72 FTEs, do you know offhand how many folks spend a portion of their time on code enforcement offhand?
So the code enforcement would be Jack Frost and Rich Fern, and I can't think of his exact number, but it is a discrete staff. They don't do it as an additional duty or other things. 100% of their job is code enforcement. And for that group, they're assigned different districts or regions. So they know that area. They go back and they do the ongoing work. They see if a house is continuing to deteriorate the conduct they were improving. I will get back the exact number for you on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Constant? Thank you. And on that note, one other concern I continue to hear about from a number of folks is that because we are having acceleration of new marijuana businesses, and that code enforcement has a duty involved with getting the certificates of occupancy and passing inspections and all that, that maybe that's pulling away from the mission of code enforcement. And I don't need an answer extemporaneously, but can you come back with a response that we can share with the community related to that, whether it's taking care of itself, we have enough for that plus, or whether it's maybe we do need some additional support related to that, or kind of what the answer might be, because I'm hearing that concern.
Through the chair, we'll show you with our current staff what we're accomplishing, the measures there. I would suggest it's a policy decision more appropriate for the assembly to decide from the feedback of your constituents if that's enough, or if they want more, if they want less. I'll tell you, they're fully occupied, fully booked right now, keeping real busy with stuff. On the other hand, it's too tempting as an executive branch of an employee to say, oh, just give me more staff. I can always use more staff.
Well, yeah,
but I'll show you what they're doing.
Yeah.
I believe they're providing
That's the
appropriate
question.
level of
Can we
service.
see the breakup between cannabis and non-cannabis related uses of the time of our code enforcement teams?
Of course, yes.
And just to add some color to that, one nuance in the way you asked the question, sir, is that code enforcement is not involved in the issuance of certificates of occupancy. Code enforcement, though, is called frequently when there are concerns or issues about smell, aroma, right? And so the question that we have been asked, I think by you or someone else in the past, is based on this new type of code violation that exists, are we seeing an increase in their workload responding to those? And to Bob's point, we can get you numbers on those, but anecdotally, I don't think that it has stretched them too thin yet.
Okay, that's really, and it could be both building side and the inspections of violation side. It would be important to understand. I think the building side is going to be less because the trajectory of these businesses is slowing down. They're not opening as much. But now the violations, it just would be nice to have a database answer to those concerns that I hear.
Certainly. Besides, after the initial zoning inspections, which are part of the certificate of occupancy or CCO,
Right.
It's strictly the periodic inspections and complaint phase where they get involved. On my other side is building official. If we go to on-site consumption involving inhalation, we are entering a whole new exciting realm of HVAC and air filter discussions to keep us occupied, but not these folks.
And it seems like there's a burn rate we should be wise to pay attention to, because I want to make sure you have a mission outside of that to achieve the goals of my constituents and theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah. I think we must have miscommunicated. Yeah. So I see on page 9, mechanical inspectors, electrical inspectors, and I'm sure there are others. So those are part of building safety. And so why did you say no when I asked if building safety was a part of your program?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Dyson. So building safety is part of my program. It's 38 of those 72 employees. I said no because the inspectors who go look at unsafe buildings are funded under the 181 fund, not the building safety fund. They work throughout the municipality. They will consult with those specialized inspectors from inside the BSA on plumbing, mechanical, electrical, or structural issue. But it is 3 individuals.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So did I understand that the budget for building inspectors is not increasing for 2020? All right, so then is it a logical assumption that you're not planning on expanding the scope, width, and depth of the inspections in 2020? He's coming out to Eagle River.
Through the chair, what we have done this year in the last half is we have hired the additional, and then was funded last year, the additional land code abatement officer who does work in Eagle River. That individual's hitting glide step now. That's a 50% increase in workforce available to service your constituents in Eagle River, the other northern communities, or the southern communities. So I see more activity in Eagle River as we've completed the training on that 181 funded individual.
Yeah, but not expanding the realm that's covered under building inspection, safety codes.
We're not expanding the building safety service area for the permit type inspections. However, as you know, Eagle River comes under Title 23 for building standards to define what a safe building is.
But we're not changing it. Not into, let the record reflect Mr. Schutte is agreeing that they're not changing.
Yeah, through the chair, if I understand your question correctly, no, this budget does not envision something happening in the building safety service
All
area.
right, thank you.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, to add to your earlier question, Senator Dyson, about code enforcement officers related to building safety. Code enforcement officers actually enforce multiple titles of code,
Sure.
from 15, 17, 21, 23, take your pick. So they,
Sure.
they cover a wide range.
Yep, thank you. And very well, thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Brian's getting so intrigued with this. That's okay. If I think of it, I'll wait my hand.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, just to Mr. Dyson, to your point, not that I'm going to do anything rash, but just because the administration isn't looking at the building safety service area doesn't mean that some of us aren't. But there's nothing at this time that would move forward, and certainly wouldn't move forward without you knowing. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Okay, I'm back. So I was following on Chris's comments there. There's something we heard from other departments too, is we do things and it increases our costs, but we don't allocate any more money. But so should the on-site assumption pass, and you said it's a lot more work for you. So, but we pass some fees. So I mean, as those inspections bring fees in, and I think my understanding of those fee increases, they'll cover your costs, right? Is that true?
That's
And
correct.
what do we do about it?
The increased valuation, that work will drive valuation, will drive fees that will pay for it. And it'll be more workload for the staff. That's correct, but we can, it will not drive additional 181 costs. It should pay for itself after the reforms that you all passed to the fee schedule.
Wait, so those costs go up, and you've got lots of them to look at. If you need another employee, you have a certain number shown here, but if more money comes in, more work came in, do you have the flexibility to hire someone because you just need them for the work that, we don't lock you into this number of employees, period.
Through the chair, I have different ways to address that. I would take a hard look before hiring another employee for a sustainable load. We have contingency contracts in place for a temporary one-time surge. We have overtime options as well. I would look at exhausting those before committing long-term to another permanent employee.
Okay, you have the flexibility you need.
Yes.
Thank you.
One more.
Yeah, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So you've mentioned the 181 fund a number of times, and we just changed the fee structure and everything. Can you brief us on the trajectory of the 181 fund and how you see that moving? Because for a couple of years now, we've had a number of concerns raised by the builders that was drained in some time way back, multiple administrations ago, and are you ever going to fix this? Can you just brief us up on how that's going to hopefully become taken care of?
Through the chair, I believe what you have done with your actions is you've created a point where there's a reasonable probability in the long run it is going to be cost neutral. That is, the Building Safety Service Fund will be self-sustaining from year to year. Some years a little more, some years a little less, but you're in the range of where it will come out about right. This year I'm projecting, barring the earthquake expenses, that there'd be about a $1.7 million differential between what's going to cost to deliver the SSA services and what we're going to collect in revenue. right now, we project if these fees have been in place, they'd have generated about 1.6, 1.7 million if we'd been different. In short, it will get you there to the point of being cost neutral to, hopefully, I'd say cost neutral. We never set out to pay for the past withdrawals for the tax appraisal system, but we have a long-run, sustainable, self-sustaining option for the SSA services.
So when you say $1.7 million differential, you mean a negative differential, right? A deficit.
So that's correct. That's money that for this year's budget comes out of the general fund.
And that's just raises an interesting note and any concerns that folks might raise that we're going to be spending money in the planning department out of these funds. Well, I guess we're going to be spending negative dollars. And so that's an interesting thing to be aware of. Thank you.
Through the chair, I had, after the assembly meeting, I had Linda Brooks, our budget brilliant person, go back through that. We have never allocated building safety funds into the planning department. There's a plethora of actions that happens in terms of BSSA paying for fleet services, IT services, and I think in the past we may not have done the best job communicating why those withdrawals are happening, i.e. services necessary for the inspectors or planners to do what they're doing. And I believe that is the source of the confusion, but we have never, the money flows the wrong way to be
right. And it's $1.7 million deficit is proof all you need that we're not sending money to the planning department.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll add, in 2017, we actually made a code amendment in Title 23 that explicitly states money generated through the services provided in the BSSA can only be spent on those services. So there's also a code protection against that kind of transfer.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Hey,
Good luck.
No, Lance.
Joe, how are you doing today?
Really
good. We're a little behind. We'll catch up. Okay, so in Mary Jo's shop in the library, a couple changes going on here. In 2019, we had a one-time hit of money that they needed to make some adjustments and improvements to automated handling in Eagle River and at the Eagle River Library. And so we had some money that was contributed to capital to do that. That project's they don't need the resources to do that project anymore. We look at their labor adjustments and the things that needed to be done just due to the contracts. One of the things in the library is they had a position in 2019 that was unbudgeted but filled, and that was due to some changes that we made in the budget. And so in this one, we want to make sure that Mary Jo has enough resources to keep that position inside her department and inside her labor budget, so we made the adjustment for that position. She also had some other labor adjustments inside 2019 that were outside just regular increases, position changes, grade changes due to duty assignments, and so some changes there. And then she asked for a little bit of money so that she could spruce up and do some cleaning inside the library, and working with Alan Chkowski and his team on how to do that. So we accommodated that in the proposed budget. But other than that, additional services inside their operating, this is what's included in the proposed budget. So let's have some questions about the changes in operation. I don't believe there's going to be any changes in operations in 20 than there are in 19. And so I think that's what I know about their operating side.
Okay, some operating questions. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one thing that surprised me to learn is the cost of ebooks. And how do ebooks factor in the long-term plan for the library if you plan to incorporate more? And then the second question I'd have has to do with the change concerning fines. And if you could speak to the impact on the budget on that.
You know, it's ironic that you're asking that, because right now there's a huge American Library Association push because Macmillan is constricting, Macmillan Publishers is constricting what we can buy. A hardback book, for $30 we get 40% off. If you go to an e-book model, it is, you might get it for $12, we pay $40. For an audio ebook, then it doubles. You might pay $20, we pay 80 to 90. So we're paying 4 times more than the general consumer is for our materials, when in the past, the old model, we got a substantial discount. Publishers, so how that impacts our budget, the circulation of paper is reducing and the ebook circulation continues to go up. The publishers right now have all kinds of models for pricing. They're all over the board. We predict, and libraries have tried to work with those publishers, but what's happening, for example, is after 26 uses, you have to buy another license. We don't even own these books. They won't, they're licensed. So when after 26, we have to buy another copy, whereas a regular paper book, you might get more use. So that, does that answer your question around the ebook?
Yes, I was wondering if you foresee adding more ebooks to circulation, or what the public demand is, and how to reconcile the higher cost.
Yeah, that's what's so substantially, frankly, egregious on the part of American publishers today, is that we want the free flow of information. And the electronic publishing is restricting that to where if you can afford it, it defeats the whole core mission of what a library is. So our budget right now is about $100,000 less than it was 10 years ago for materials. And when I mentioned that we get a 40% discount on a hardback trade, regular book, when the an ebook costs 4 times that, it does restrict what we can buy. And without a greater budget dollars, we currently spend half of what per capita, what Fairbanks spends on materials. So, as it regards fines, we in this, as part of this budget, kind of in relationship to the collection request, we requested more for our materials, but from a priority side, elimination of fines, frankly, is more important to us. And the reason why is libraries across the nation are eliminating fines, and I forgot the math, but it's pretty substantial on what libraries are trying to do. 3 years ago, we entered into an agreement with ASD where they gave us those parents that allowed us to electronic versions, and so we dumped 40,000 kids into our database for cards. It seems conflicting tension when we have all those kids' cards, and yet we charge them and block their fines. And if you look at the reading scores in this community, 52% of our kids are not at reading level by 4th grade. And so from our standpoint, we need to try to encourage children to be reading and have access to materials. And that's really, so for us it's an equity issue. We considered recommending just children's materials, but what happens is parents use their kids' cards. If a parent's card is blocked, then they'll use the kids and they'll just go right down the line. When we examined the cards that are blocked, it's people in low-income areas are the predominant users. So we really do feel that it is a very large equity issue. 52% of the children in Anchorage have free and reduced lunch scores. Does that kind of answer? Well, the other piece is collecting fines is unpleasant for everyone. If you think of what we collect, we could be doing so much more with that unpleasant experience to increase usage. So I see the elimination of fines, frankly, as a cheap investment in the library in a different way.
And then just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. It's my understanding that actually it costs more to have that collection mechanism than what you get in the fines. Thanks.
That's my question. Yeah. Where does it show up here? Because it's not listed in the, if I might, in the changes to your budget.
So inside the revenue side, I think I did bring the AM support, but there's a line item that talks about reduction in library fines. It's roughly, I think, 100,000 or 80,000.
I'm sorry, what we
The,
were using?
the library fines.
Yeah, it's around 90.
Yeah, it's in a revenue line item. It's identified as a lost revenue, and I think it's probably in the very top of the AM support on the revenue adjustments. There'll be a line item in there for library fines reduction in revenue.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
Yes. Yeah, so, Alex and Judy, I've been disappointed as I look at what I would call missions and measures all the way through the process. And measures, in my experience, are supposed to be pretty objective. And in that light, one of the things I want to know is what's happening to the usage of the libraries. More people are coming or less, more books. You know, so just simple answer over the last 3 years, what do you think?
Well, the overall, when you consider database usage, ebook, audio, ebooks, it's going up. When you consider all of those.
And visits of live Homo sapiens to your stores?
You know, the visits have been kind of wonky because of the renovation. So we are not at the same levels that we were. And the particularly in Eagle River, when we've been closed twice.
Yep.
So our visits are down.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Allentown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, when you talk about your, the collection of materials and electronic books versus paper, and this kind of pricing differential and what you can get, in kind of analog form versus electronic form, do you have any policies that guide that budget, or how is policy being set, internally about where to spend that particular money?
It's kind of one of our most popular items is called Hoopla, and it's a downloadable product that you can stream movies, audiobooks, ebooks, comic books. So we are pumping more money into that product because it's so popular. And so we don't have a strict policy. We do it more like on a feeling basis, children's materials get a substantial amount of money, and every year we kind of concentrate on something new. Right, we just invested along with the Alaska Library Catalog, and we're a member of that ALC, which means 90% of the libraries share materials. So that really is a benefit. So because of that consortium, we're able to draw on all these other libraries. So in some ways it stretches our budget, it makes it a little time consuming. So from an angle of policies though, we don't have exact policies. You mean like how much you should spend here and here and here?
I just was wondering if you had, guiding documents or guiding plans.
It really it's a fluid process. Kind of depends on where the market is. We, as part of the consortium, one of the drivers for us is that we don't want people to have to wait forever in a day. And when I go back to the Macmillan Publishing, they're now selling us one copy of an ebook, one copy for all of the state. So that impacts the numbers of holds. When we would normally buy, we try to have a ratio of 5 to 7 holds per copy. People don't want to wait. Did that answer your question? Sort of.
Partly. It leads to 2 quick follow-ups,
Uh-huh.
and these can maybe be addressed a bit offline, but are there any considerations when you acquire materials? I'm assuming they're acquired by the library system as a whole, but how do we determine where they land by location? And then the follow-up question, I'll just ask it, is what, if any, public input is asked for or drives the acquisition of materials?
Yeah. We have something called suggest a purchase, and any citizen can make that request that we buy something. So to some degree it's customer-driven purchasing. We hope next year as part of our strategic plan, and our strategic plan was outward looking, to really have more conversations with the community I particularly think of non-English speaking communities. Our stuff isn't circulating, and so we pull it, but what do people want? Asking those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary Jo, can you tell me how much it costs to collect those $100,000 worth of fees? Do you know? I mean, it's probably, or fines, yeah.
Yeah, it costs us about, let's see, I do have that, actually. I just have it. It costs us about $75,000 on a conservative, conservative approach. About 2 minutes per transaction, but that's a conservative. What happens in the whole fee collection process, the first year we might get some money, okay? The second year it drops off. By the third year, we're never gonna see the money. And so it takes about 2 minutes per transaction. If it's a nasty transaction, it's a lot more. And so what we also weighed is the opportunity cost for that 2 minutes. You know, we want to be helping promote reading, promoting the use of the library, not having these negative interactions. So it's not just the $75,000 worth of cost, it's the other things. Because then we have to go to the bank and we have to do a variety of things.
So it's basically a wash, and you get a positive impact out of not charging fines. I just want to thank you for being such an amazing leader in the community and always thinking about equity and about our communities and how to make the library accessible. It's awesome.
Thank you. Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mary Jo, I'm wondering if you think if we had increased people mover service to the library, if you could get back to your previous numbers before the remodel.
Well, we always hope so. One of the issues really nationally is the changing role of a public library today. We are evolving into a community meeting place and a place for people to gather. So, and that is a form of sharing information, so it fits within our mission. You know, we are, as part of the strategic plan, we really are trying to look on how to expand. So, for example, I'm going to use story hours. We serve the same people. They bring their child every time, and I think for the most part, it's probably 80% white. And those children are going to have good reading scores because their parents or their guardians bring them to the library anyhow. Where we struggle and where the community struggles are the children that don't have, either parents are working or they come from another culture where they're not libraries, or intrinsically it's not part of the culture. So that's where we need to do bigger bang for the buck. That bigger bang for the buck is hard to do. And because it costs more, we've got people going out into Head Starts and other communities. But where we can't get to those kids are those small in-home daycares that perhaps might not be licensed. Those are the children that really need us. So in the next 3 years, as part of the strategic plan, those are the communities we're going to reach. Programs do provide an opportunity for people to come into the library. Think of Harry Potter, and there were 1,800 people of all ages. So, you know, we do hope that the use continues, but one of the other issues is that it's not just people coming into the library. Through the virtual services, particularly, we have a great website because, no offense, we split from the city. Thank you, IT. But we have a virtual library so that people can use the databases, can use Morningstar. We've added Foundation Directory. We've added all these other products. The Foundation Directory and Merchant are business databases. So we really want to promote both in-house and out-of-house use. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, let me just add to it. I'll be a little bit more blunt than Mary Jo, who gave a wonderful answer. Yes. If the bus stop came back, I do think you would see a commensurate increase in use.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. I guess I just want to dive in a little bit more. It's not just the reduction in the library fines, but it seems like there's a fairly significant reduction across program generated revenue. In general, library fees, use of copier. Can you just talk a little bit about that in terms of why you have reduced all of that?
You know, one of the things that, again, we have not reached the same revenue level that we had before the renovation, and that was around the meeting room use. Even though we now have, I think it's 9 meeting room spaces. And so we've put money into this year, well, let me go back to that. Last year, we were 70,000 short on our projected revenue costs. This year, it's probably going to be around 20. And the reason why is that it has taken time to have the public know about the usage of our meeting rooms. And then we've added the event center that had been the Alaska room, and we are now at wedding fairs, or I don't know, where people go and
Like set up a wedding.
yeah. So we're doing a lot more promotion, and if you've heard on NPR promotion, we're pumping money in for advertising, and that's partially through the foundation. So that's been a drop of revenue. Fines have been a drop in revenue, and copiers is the one area that I thought had been increasing a little. It depends on the location for that one. And then lost books. The more people use, for me, because I always have fines, I use more and more ebooks because I don't have to pay fines and I don't lose the book. So that's the lost book is another revenue. To compensate to some degree, that's why we added passport revenue. So all locations but Girdwood is doing passport, and we get $35 a pop for that, and then we have to mail off for $7.50 the same day to the postal. So we make around $25, so we're about $14,000 for that this year. Next year we project more. You know, and the reason why we did it, it brought in revenue, but there's only one site now in Anchorage proper that does provide passports. We see it as an added service for our public. Did that answer your question?
It did. And just one other question, Mr. Chair. I also noticed in the front that under the section department goals that contribute to achieving the mayor's mission that there's nothing in there around homelessness. And I wonder about that because are you not involved in the coordinated?
Yeah, we are.
And
the wrong piece was added. We had updated our PVRs and that piece to reflect our strategic plan. Well, our strategic plan, I mean, we're heavily involved with homeless issues. Particularly, we have a social worker that we received a grant for, though we paid that out of our staff funds, so that's extended. We received money from Recovery Alaska, and next year we'll have some peer navigators, people that have been either homeless or into recovery to help. We have a talking circle with one of our customers targeting Alaska natives. So the kind of work that and then we also have interns. The kind of work that the social worker is doing is not traditional social work where you're watching a whole case study. Instead, it is kind of drop in and trying to find resources. I can certainly send you more information about the accomplishments of that.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with a lot of it. I was just concerned that it wasn't reflected in the budget. So thanks.
Thank you. Got a few more questions. Mr. Constant.
Same concern or thought I was about to ask and kind of point to the good work that's being done at the library in relationship to the issues of homelessness and really poverty in our city. And I want to suggest, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, that you are in conversation with the 4 primary funders of the $40 million relative to ways that the library can serve as a support in the campaign that's going to emerge over the next couple of years to broadly address the issues of homelessness and people who are struggling. And I understand, and first I'll step back from all that and say, once again, like Ms. Quinn Davidson, I'm deeply honored to serve with you in this community because you look out hard for the people who need it the most. And the administration, although Ona's not here, I would say thank you to them as well, the director, because it reflects our values really well here, that we're going to stand up for people and provide a safe, clean place. And so I heard there are 3 areas of need from other people who are involved with your universe, and that's a cleaner facility, more safe facility, and social workers, people to help engage. And so I see that you have increased some cleaning, and I see that you are continuing the social work. What's the need for security that you see in the next year or 2? I watched one of your staff be assaulted by a member of the public before a meeting.
Yeah. You know, securities, you know, all libraries around the country suffer from, you know, we're doing stuff that is not traditional.
Right.
And homelessness has always been an issue in libraries, but today it is really an issue around the country. The security, we do have security on every floor, but let me give you an example. So one of our staff members, if you come in the door by the Marston Theater, there's a little cubby where people can do all kinds of things. And inevitably, it's a trash heap. Now there's a basket in there. And for that sort of thing, we don't have. So we utilize these high school kids, they're called ACEs, that are provide training skills for these kids. They're picking up all the stuff on our grounds. So security and you know, custodial are a big thing. So that said, we really have an advantage because security is housed at the library for the city, and that does help.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my questions have been pretty much answered. I had wanted to comment that it's my understanding when you factor in the lost material costs, in addition to the staff time spent on collecting fines, it nets out and maybe even tilts a little in the other direction, was my understanding. I'll just echo then what Ms. Quinn Davidson and Mr. Conson have said in terms of gratitude for what you do for our community. I know when I came back up here and was looking for a job, my office was the library, and just, you know, without being able to afford an internet connection and trying to get started, it was the best unemployment space in the city. So thank you for that.
It's a good tip for all of us living on an assembly salary.
Yeah. There's not a food bank
and that's
at the library.
Thanks to you all for supporting the broadband. You know, it was really bad a while ago, and you know that will continue growing exponentially. We've actually reduced the number of computers because more people are bringing in their own devices. But going back to the security, the one place where we are having issues, frankly, is Eagle River. We don't have a security guard at that location. We have them at Mountain View and Muldoon. We hope that better cameras and might help, but that is something we're watching.
Thank you, Chair. Just if you on that point, yeah,
sure.
Can you get us a cost for having someone there so we understand the fiscal impact?
Sure, it's $33 an hour.
Through the chair, just a reminder though, that is actually a condo facility that we own in conjunction with other people. So it's not simply a library for.
Thank you. Mr. Dice.
Yeah, thank you. I'm impressed with you and your presentation. Probably more depth and detail than is appropriate for here, but be that as it may. Offline, I want you to tell me what's happening with the trend of people coming to use the computers in order to interact with the city or all kinds of things. But more to the point, it has been suggested that we, the Assembly, have all of our meetings, committee meetings and workshop sets over at LUSAC. And so I'd like you to work with this very delightful lady back here and give us a rough idea of what it would cost if we transferred all the meetings that we have in this building to LUSAC, you know, and assembly chambers or other meeting rooms and so on. So that's a little longer term project, and don't let that defer you from other stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
My question's actually related to the capital budget, if we're ready to move to there.
Yeah, the last one on the queue, so we're ready.
Good. On the capital budget, we have 3 projects inside the library. One of them is to make some safety improvements inside the library. They have some receptacles that are going, that need to be, some tripping hazards and some other things that they want to work on. I think they also have a little bit of money in here to upgrade their PA system. Originally they had a larger number, but I think Mary Jo has been looking at some options there. The 950 is for 4 elevators that were the original elevators back when the library was built in the 80s. It is not part of the renovation, so that's what those 4 are for. And then some security and some camera improvements, and some outdoor improvements out at the Mountain View Library to have some landscape areas that provide some locations that they're going to clean up and probably hardscape it a little bit more so that some less illicit activity or no illicit activity happens there. I'll just remind the Assembly that these are going to be in the area-wide bond, similar to the facilities for senior centers, and last year they did not pass. And the fact is when these things don't happen, Mary Jo, we can't find the equipment, we can't find the pieces to improve these elevators anymore. You just don't make them. You have to fabricate them to keep the elevators going. And so I think it's a really important need inside the library, at least on the capital program, and Mary Jo can speak to the needs on the other two. So that's what's going on with the capital program.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, my question was actually going to be about that. So we introduced the CIP on Tuesday, or we had the first public hearing, but the actual bond measures, I don't believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, haven't been presented yet.
Correct.
And it's been suggested to me that perhaps we included the library bond with these other things, and it failed last time. And I've heard sort of conflicting theories as to why. Do you think if the library had a standalone bond, do you think that would improve or reduce the chances that it passes? I'm asking Mary Jo specifically.
Okay. I really don't know. We were highly disappointed that last year's didn't pass. We have the commitment of the administration that the language will be a lot clearer. I really don't know. Some of our foundation and lab members are suggesting that, but without an analysis, I'm not sure.
Is there anyone from the administration who would like to speak to that?
Yeah, through the chair, we share this concern. We think that both the revamping of the language, which was terrible, of the facilities bond, so that our senior centers and our libraries can actually be talked about in plain English on the ballot, will go a long way. But a standalone library bond, we think we're nervous about it, to be honest. And so we have made a conscious decision to not separate out the library's asks as a standalone. The general thinking is, whether it's true or not, when people fill out a ballot and they're saying yes to bonds, they always look for one to say no to. And we like to make it hard to say no to libraries.
Yeah,
Should we put a fake bond on there then?
Yeah.
$1 billion.
No, it'd be like the LIO SAP bond. Just a quick follow-up there, Mr. Chair. I think I generally agree with the administration's thinking on this, but I just wanted to note it because I have had some people from the library sort of community come to me and say, no, let us fight for this. Let us have our thing that we can fight for that's clear and people will support the library. And that to me is counterintuitive to where I thought it. I feel like the senior center and them together are more likely to succeed, but I don't know either.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I really don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, thank you. It's worth thinking about.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Mary Jo. We missed our break time. You guys want to take a 5-minute before we get into Alex? I think Alex is going to be quick. Finance, equally quick. Purchasing is going to be super quick. I think you're going to have some questions for IT. So
sure, we'll take a quick 5.
Okay, thank you.
Who won the game?
We got 19 grand, but it wasn't the 500 and 490,000 that we're looking for.
Damn it. Does the
Yeah, I
game go
called
on?
it on the phone for 2 hours, 2.5 hours with the IRS. We had a little snafu in 2016 that caused us to not get some Build America Bond rebates, about $500,000 that we were trying to chase down for the last 3 years.
So I saw that on your bio.
Yeah.
So.
Right?
Yeah.
Jeff and I, yes, he is, unfortunately.
I know. He used to be neighbors as well.
Right. Because you ran that little thing that you ran.
Now it's not little.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, Jeff and I were good. Sorry. Probably.
I know. We said go out, look for greener pastures,
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Roll out your. That's awesome. Cool.
Really?
Yeah,
So, okay. So when it gets turned back on, I do have cable in my office.
I can't. I'm excited.
Come in and watch.
I just can't hide it.
Right.
Me too.
What are you excited about?
I was telling Felix, like, that's
Nothing.
most
Don't ask me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Too far away.
Yeah. No,
She doesn't like make the public.
yeah. Well, we have staff there, so she really wanted to do that kind of thing, stuck up here for hours.
Under his desk.
Right?
For us, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Doing well. Yeah. Yeah. You have one Sunday.
So when they do the cost, we gotta do both. I don't disagree, that's not a bad idea, we just gotta.
Just don't know how, I need their
Okay.
make some copy paste. Fix my website, I just, my brother reached out to it. It's a lot of, it's a process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my problem is
Those, keep them on track. Next year we'll have more realistic. We had a realistic one. Last year they only spent 10 minutes on this and 10 minutes on that. I put these, I keep track of how much time, so I adjust.
All right.
So, feeling better?
a little better, yeah.
Yeah?
But I'm still all stuffy and tired, but I feel a little better. My boiler's out of my house too, so I bought some space.
Did you send you that one?
Yeah. You give them the day off?
I don't know if you want to meet.
How did you get that, Judy?
It's easy, down there. Show?
He actually did.
Oh, is it? It's a police and fire.
Oh.
Okay, how do you want to handle these?
I bought them from Walmart. They're like, they were surprised.
I didn't say it on the record, but I
Yeah, actually,
we're talking
the
reply
furnace,
back.
they ordered it, it should arrive in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no.
But how do you want to do, do you want to meet together?
Although it's so busy right now.
The first quote was 9,000, but I got that.
But yeah, we should have a conversation. Look, I mean, he's trying to.
Yeah. First quote was 9,000, and I like harassed them for 2 weeks and finally got it. Well, I don't need a fancy, like, give me a cheaper one. It's like not Walmart, and it's fine before. So the next quote was 5,500.
I just talked about ACT, and, they, petroleum, cement, shippers would be the tariffs. But when it comes to the rest of the country, I guarantee you have, tariffs
in your house or in your business?
Presumably, they won't pay for that.
No,
Because it will already be.
Right, they'll have to pay for their part, and others.
I think some people,
So I guess.
if you're a young person looking for a
That's
career,
the cost causer, cost
a
payer.
plumber, because my experience is it's impossible. It takes weeks to get them. They're like, I'm booked up. I feel like I'm booked up like
Fuel guys, because they're
Right.
one small.
Right.
one of my friends compared it to a neurologist. Like, yeah,
No.
I could see you weeks ago.
You have a plumber and you hold on to that.
What's that?
We have a plumber and he's done, yeah, because all of our HVAC, he does plumbing projects, my husband over engineers. He'll like fix it and bring me out like extra pieces, but he's great, but he's hard to get, to like plan out.
Significant portion of that need to be coached.
Ready to go?
Very exciting.
All right.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and get going, folks.
Before I forget, and before we start with Alex, one of the
Yeah.
things that you had, I think Mr. Perez-Padilla has mentioned about the performance measures. So the Office of Management and Budget is responsible for reviewing and updating the performance measures for the departments. And so many departments have updated those, and then they're in the process of updating those. And there are many who are working with them right now where their performance measures will get adjusted, and we will start. They will actually start reporting them in the first quarter. The reason that we didn't make a change mid-year is that we wanted to have an entire year on those. But some of their performance measures are outdated, they're lengthy, they're not relevant, and so we've been making sure that they get cleaned up. And so departments are cleaning them up. You will see different performance measures because of either their missions changed or they were doing things for no apparent reason. So we've been working with them to do that. So I just wanted to remind the Assembly that before I forget to remind myself to tell you that.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
I've worked that stuff. You're supposed to have objective ways of measuring it.
Yep.
Very difficult.
Yep.
And lots of service organizations to have hard numbers in order. So I recognize that. And there's always a temptation to default to activities. You know, we did so many hours talking to community councils or whatever.
But so what?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So I understand that, and that's an area I think we can do better.
And I would agree with you, Mr. Dyson. When I sit down with departments, I ask them what they're measuring, and then I say so, and then they have to tell me why, and then I say so what, and then they say now what. Because you know, just because you're measuring widgets because you can measure widgets, that doesn't mean anything to me. What I want to know is how is it improving or measuring the success of your business.
Yeah, results.
Not because you have the stuff.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
So
Thank
anyway,
you.
that's a whole nother event. So in Alex's shop, I mean, the CFO really in his department, he has inside his department, he's got two folks, himself and his administrative assistant, and so there's no changes in Alex's world. While he does manage the departments that we're going to be, the next 6 or 7 departments that we're going to talk about, inside Alex's world, there's no changes, no additional staff, the amount of money that they would have inside contractual services, any of that stuff, that's not changing. So, but I think the next departments, particularly in finance, which Alex is heavily involved in, reports to him as executive manager. Inside his shop, same old, no biggie, no change.
Okay. Don't have any questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next one is finance. So on the finance department, as I mentioned earlier, the finance department is made up of 4 different departments. It has the controller, which is basically all of our accounting. They're the ones responsible for reducing the CAFR, our grant accounting, and our tracking, and everything related to recording our actual expenses that are managed inside the department and truing up our books at the end of the year. Property appraisal inside Jack's group to manage and all of the things that happen to do with the property appraisal. And public finance, all of the things related to our investments, our bonds, our interest, and seeing how not only for municipality, but public finance also helps manage the bond structure and indebtedness and issuance for the school district. And then the last piece is treasury. And so in treasury, obviously everything that's related to tax collections, revenue inside the door, it comes through the treasury department. And so there's 90 people inside finance divided among all of those different departments. So for 2020, the salaries and adjustments for all of those folks is there's many non-reps in there. There's some AMEA. There's a variety of other things. But due to the nature of their business and their duties, there are a significant amount of non-reps. I think in the accounting side of the house, it's a lot of AMEA. We talked a lot about in the overview slides, the biggest change inside public finance will be an $800,000 increase into property appraisal's budget. $535,000 of that will be directed to assist in the CAMA system and the debt service. I mean, there's an effort. Excuse me. It's basically our property appraisal system.
Computer-assisted mass appraisal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So our property appraisal system needs a lot of updating, needs a lot of help, and so this is, and then we're working a process to update that, and then we have we're recommending or proposing that we add 3 positions, and we talked about that. We'll be a supervisor and clerk, and they will be really focused on exemptions. The I-team, the innovation team, Brendan Babb and Chris Schuette's group is supporting Jack in part of this process as well, and so we're at to add 3 people in there to work through those exemptions. And they're not only going to be looking at those that are getting exemptions that shouldn't be, they're going to be looking at those individuals that could get exemptions that aren't, primarily in seniors. There's many seniors that aren't getting not many, but probably over 1,000 seniors that aren't getting an exemption that Jack's team with the innovation team can help them manage that. So inside finance and all of the things that they do, that is the biggest change going on inside public finance, or the inside finance department. If you have questions on the controller, property appraisal, treasury, or public finance, myself or Mr. Slipka can help you address it.
Thank you. Ms. Allentown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm just trying to refresh my memory, that both those property appraisal items are ones that we anticipate paying for themselves over the course of time, or was that just the personnel piece?
So the second piece, the property appraisal exemption review, is something we think will more than pay for itself. The first piece is debt service on what is a $7 million program to replace our entire property appraisal system, and it's just updating something that ultimately will be operating on a much less costly manner. Just to give you perspective, the hardware cost alone of having the old systems run on a mainframe is $1 million a year. That goes down to, I believe, $100,000 a year once the system is up and running.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Purchasing, I think I can swing for purchasing. So they had a one-time adjustment last year in the approved. We were aware, and we asked departments, every department this, if they know that they're going to have somebody that's going to retire, and they have a huge amount of leave on the bank that we are going to have to cash out when they retire. Ron made us aware of that in similar time this year, that we had one employee who was going to retire, and they had at least $40,000 in leave cash out. We give them a one-time hit, a bump in their labor to make that so they don't have to assume it. So that's what that $40,000 is. He doesn't have that coming in next year, so that's some salary adjustments going on inside in his world, and then he had some other labor adjustments that he was doing similar to I think in development service we have another department where they made some other labor adjustments for about $13,000 where they did some upgrades in advance due to duties that were going on inside purchasing. But other than that, no contractual changes while they do manage contracts or procurement for every department except for the district. No changes in purchasing. Pretty simple.
Don't see any questions. Thank you.
Okay, now take a break. Excellent. Susie, you want to come on up? So in Ms. Marshall's world, in Office of Information Technology, I have two listed kind of on the operating side. She has 75 people inside the IT department. They had a one-time hit of money that they needed to support for the cloud hosting for SAP inside, and I don't know what HEC stands for, so I'm afraid to say it out loud. HANA
HANA Environment Cloud.
HANA Environment Cloud. Thank you. Making a lot of noise here. Thank you. And then so inside Susie's world, inside in 2019, she made some adjustments where she moved some non-labor money into her labor side to bring some additional staff support inside the systems analyst position. So with that change, we do a transition. We keep that money into her labor budget, and we show that as an additional position, and we subsequently reduce her non-labor budget in that to accommodate that. And then in depreciation, Susie has the lion's share, if not, I think, all of her share of depreciation for basically our desktop and our day-to-day technology. It's all inside that house. And then on the bottom, the 2020 adjustments for accounting for transaction and depreciation, that $10 million, a significant portion of that, a lion's share of that is we start depreciating SAP, because now we start bringing that system online, and then once it's online, we start initiating depreciation. That's why that number is so big. In Susie's, in her budget, the amount that we're appropriating is that 23 of that $24 million. That 10 million we don't appropriate for, because we don't appropriate for depreciation. But inside that, I think the one thing that I will add is that in 19, there was a lot of work inside information technology to do some restructuring that would wean us off the expenses of our contractors and then formulate a development team inside the department where they would have individual responsibilities or lead responsibilities for the modules inside SAP. And she's, I think, got pretty much all of that set up and filled. There might be some exceptions, but that is weaning us. It's not that we don't have contractors, but that structure that she did inside SAP. Not only last year did we did not add any money into SAP for the budget. We're not adding any money into SAP for the budget this year. It's all inside of our operating house. So if I missed anything of that wrong, Susie can correct.
Mr. Wells. Quick comment too. For a while I was saying, oh, it must be Tuesday, another SAP increase. So the calendar's all off now.
That's good.
There's something that's not really broken out here so much, but I think it's do you do our website, the city's website? Is that your?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, there was years ago had a system. It was a little clunky, but it worked. Where if you were interested in issues on the hillside of zoning or something, you go in and click on this, and I would get emails about this case coming, and then I know what's going on. And we don't have that now. There's something out there that just doesn't work. And there's so many. I mean, it was always good, but we have, in particular now, people who are really concerned about marijuana stuff is an applicant can do a public meeting literally 3 years before it comes to us. So they saw that, and then they hear nothing. They think it's moved on. And then we do a mailing in June, and they may get that mailing. But then 3 months later, it finally comes to us, and they've lost track. It's so critical to have that electronic communication.
I agree.
Are we anywhere near getting that back up?
Well, we've just upgraded the infrastructure for the external website, so now it is no longer a 2003 platform. It's a 2016, which is closer to current. Yes, I would like to have a better notifier. Right now, it is a we've had a lot of conversations about it. It's definitely not a good subscription service, so we need to upgrade that, and I will put some energy toward that.
Is there money in here for that?
Well, what we have done is we have recently hired people that have this expertise in-house now, and so we should be able to easily start to spin up services on this new platform. It's upgrading to a newer version of SharePoint. So we'll be able to do those kind of things. So I will make sure, we've even done a big project as a team to try to prioritize it and how would we do this work and be creative on trying to think of solutions. RSS feeds, which are, that's what we have now, RSS feeds. So yeah, I would love and welcome feedback, and we'll put it on our project list and make it happen this year.
You'd be a hero for many.
Okay. And it is, you're talking about subscribing to when meeting notices and all that stuff,
it's on my radar, and we have kind of outlined it, scoped it, but we definitely need to take it and do some action. So I'm happy to put that on my roadmap.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So were we able to fill all the positions, people with the expertise to take the place of those contractors, or are we still advertising?
We have one that we just had an application for. I mean, last week we finally closed the last open position, and there was one qualified person. So we are still negotiating with them. So, yeah, it's
Come a
really,
long way then.
Yeah, it has come a long way, and I think we're getting there, and the team is really owning it. The knowledge transfer is happening between the consultants and the staff, and I just they're positive about change, so I think we're doing good.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Weddleton's question, I was looking in here as to where the cost for the website is, and it sounds like it's primarily staff time.
Yeah.
So, how much time would you say it would take to do the upgrades Mr. Weddleton's talking about, and just for the whole program of updating? And then I have a second question for Lance.
Oh, okay. So the question was, how much time do you think it would take?
Or the cost to update?
Well, it wouldn't be additional cost if we didn't absorb that cost in-house, for sure. I think what we probably need to do is really get, let's take a step back. We are doing two big efforts right now for departments, for the permitting department and so the health department. We're upgrading their websites to a whole new look and a new feel, and hopefully that'll guide how we can do the rest of the external website. But if there are very specific things like the subscribing, the notices, subscribing to meetings, if there's other things that you guys would like to see, we can make sure we can put that on the roadmap and get back to you on additional costs. But right now, we could absorb that in our existing. So it would just be putting off other things. So we would make that a priority and do. But we are getting our team really tuned up, and I think their expertise is getting there. So I think it'll be good.
Or if I can ask it a different way, what do we spend now, would you say, on maintaining the website?
Like the people?
Yeah, just
I'd say we kind of have we just hired, we had one FTE, probably 2.5 FTEs. It's probably a good estimate.
That's full-time equivalent.
Yeah, so, right. So we definitely have one full-time person, and then she's backfilled with this other guy who just came on, but he's already leaps and bounds catching on, and I think we'll be able to just start cranking through all those upgrades. So what does that cost? And real, maybe if you say 2 FTEs, you're maybe at 300,000, I guess, annually. It's just an estimate.
Thanks.
But if you want some real hard, numbers, because I can work on them.
just wanted to have an idea of how much it costs to have the current site and what the additional costs, to make
Yeah, and I do think we could just fit it in our current project schedule, and we just prioritize it. And I do know, I understand the importance of it. So.
Thanks. And then my question for Lance.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
The 2020 adjustment for accounting transactions, we usually see this kind of thing when we get to the enterprise and utilities.
Oh yeah, it's going to be big.
So,
don't steal my thunder before I get there.
Okay, should I wait then? I was going to ask, how do I explain this to people? Because there are some people, who...
Are you looking at the 10 million on the bottom?
Yes.
So, depreciation, the simplest way to explain it, depreciation is non-cash. Mm-hmm. We only appropriate for stuff cash out the door. We don't pay for depreciation out the door. We don't pay you for depreciation, but we do pay you for a website. Mm-hmm. So depreciation is cash, is non-cash. It's stuff that doesn't go out the door, stuff that we don't pay for. It's stuff that we account for that things are getting of lesser value. So you'll see in for utilities, so that's the simplest way. I'm going to stop right there.
I don't know if some of the community councils will be satisfied with that answer.
Okay. I will get it more complicated. I'll make it, I'll get it more complicated.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Go ahead, Mr. Middleton.
The whole notion of depreciation is a bizarre, warped accounting thought. And it's accountants are ruining the way we keep track of what we have. You know, I mean, look, my warehouse is depreciated to 0, and it is better than it was when it was built. It's just a bizarre accounting thing, and I'm so glad to zero it out, move on with life. I wish I'd never even saw it, and it makes no sense.
It is a bizarre accounting thing, and for good accounting, we need to show that in our budget books.
For legal accounting, it doesn't make sense.
That's when you sell.
For good accounting, it's good that we show it in our books.
It matters when you sell.
All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Back to Susie to the previous item. It's not just meeting notices though. Minutes, records,
right.
audio tracks, like all the stuff on a subject area that someone selects on, that they're getting a flow of all the content that's related to that subject.
Okay.
And I know that it could be any number of subjects, and we will have to narrow it some ways, but, and that's a conversation, and we might actually set up a group of members of the public to come in at some point, and we test them, like, what's your interest? How do you find it? See how they go, and then build based on what people think, because
Some more outreach. Yeah.
basically, I know a lot of people who can't find anything, and I sometimes can't find anything. And I'm surprised sometimes when I do find something, because I'm like, wow, how did I not know that was there? Right? And so there's some kind of that. It's more than just the notices, it's the actual content.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see any other questions.
So before you go, Susie, let's talk about capital program. So inside her capital program, there's descriptions in the book, but I will give it a stab here. I mean, basically the top one, the way that Susie's capital program works is that we as part of her overall operating budget, we give her money with the anticipation that stuff's going to move out of her operating budget and go to a capital account, and she uses that capital account to buy this stuff. That's why the other is there. That's the short and sweet of that. So it's pretty simple. The top one is basically desktop stuff that's going in and out of the door, the governance, risk, and compliance. There's a lot of changes that we're working on for access control and security measures that are going on. Moving the SAP on premise instead of it being worked on the cloud, it would be here. Life cycle replacement costs, that's basically a lot of the enterprise stuff that we do. Records management, Susie mentioned that that's a big thing that she's doing. We know that there are other departments that are going to benefit from this as well. Security and hardware, it's a very big thing for us, and Susie and her team taking every measure possible to make sure that we don't get hacked. And so the hardware and software we need to make sure to put up our best guard is part of this program. And then just replacing servers. The server stuff that we have is just outdated, and I apologize for the VoIP, Mr. Dyson, which stands for Voice Over Internet Protocol, which allows you to basically use. When I saw that, I went, Fred is going to just have me. He's going to have me for lunch when he sees VoIP. If I don't know what it means, so I made a note. Anyway, so basically, that's allowing us to use our phone system and our technology for voice override. So that is it's a piece of technology that we use that needs to get improved. So it's a lot of techie stuff, not a lot of sexy stuff, but if we don't have it, we can't operate. That's the long and short of it.
All right. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lance, can you say again what is in the other category?
What is
what
it?
comprises the other category?
It's a master lease.
Yeah.
It's just
yeah.
In a way, it's a master lease agreement. It's a
Okay.
long-term. And
So we have a capacity of $100 million that we could do insurances on stuff, and right now we're at maybe $40 million. So we finance all of IT from that program because it's very cost effective.
So we have to pay for that through her budget. Yes.
Right. Depreciation.
Oh, look at you. Pretty soon you'll be on this side of the table, Mr. Constant. Careful. Okay, that's all for Susie's capital side, unless you have some questions.
I don't see any. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Susie. So in Miss Wynn Pearson's world, it's very simple. Basically, the only adjustment we have in Becky's world is adjustments for salary. So we look at the amount of the personnel changes and the changes that we have inside inside the attorneys, which are pretty much all execs. I think she has a couple of non-reps, but clearly that's it. No special programs, no changes in, and again, I think somebody mentioned it, when we have a settlement, while our municipal attorney's office handles that settlement, the cost of that settlement is then budgeted or located inside the department, either through a supplemental or if we know it's coming, we do it. And frankly, for settlements, we never budget until they're done. Once they're done, then we know what we're doing. Otherwise, if we put some number down there, then that might drive the influence of the settlement piece. So you'll never see those numbers inside the municipal attorney's department. We'll always see them in the other departments. So other than that, unless you have some questions about what she's doing with her 48 individuals in civil and criminal, I do have at it.
All right, I have a few questions. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And outside of the 48 full-time employees, how many additional law firms do we have on contract for other cases? Do you have any idea?
That's a good question. And I can find out. I don't have the total number off the top of my head because we have a series of law firms with whom we have like an ongoing retainer. For instance, Kemple Huffman Ellis does all of our regulatory work, whether or not we're actively in a rate case. They also answer regulatory questions. We've used Reeves Modio for environmental questions. We don't have in-house environmental expertise. We have at this point, I think, 3 conflict counsel. Because we have a public defense contract because we don't have public defenders in-house. We have an outside firm that does that work for us. When they have a conflict, we start with a series of other people. I think at this point we have 3 different people doing that work. We have outside counsel on the Henry litigation, outside counsel working on the ML&P transaction, and outside counsel working on the court litigation. But I could get you a comprehensive list if you'd like to know the full scope of everyone we have at this point engaged on any matter.
Yeah, I figured there was several.
It's generally, the chair, any complicated litigation or transaction that exceeds our in-house capacity, which is really the ML&P transaction, where we just need the stables of associates and paralegals and et cetera to deal with the documents that we don't have in-house. And then it is areas of expertise we don't have in-house, regulatory and environmental being notable, and then the contract public defense. We did try to hire an in-house environmental practitioner this year, hoping that we might replace that, but we were unable to woo her to join us. She took a job in Washington State instead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Salazar.
Thank you. Do we have in here, or where do we account for it if we recover fees or we pay fees, attorney's fees, in regards to litigation?
Through the chair, that generally goes through the department that pays for the fees. So we'll, if we have an attorney's fees award or an attorney's fee, or we receive an attorney's fees award, generally it goes to the department that the case was representing.
And is it our practice to try to recover attorney's fees when permissible?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Ms. McPherson, I know we've had some challenges with filling positions. How are we currently on our filled versus unfilled positions, and what's the trajectory there?
We're doing quite well at this point. You're right that this has been a year where we've had several openings, particularly on the criminal side of the house. At this point, on the civil side, we are fully staffed for the first time in a year. With the departure of Joyce Weaver Johnson, who some of you might remember, we had a vacant position for some time. Right this past year, we were able to hire 2 new fantastic senior-level civil attorneys, Ruth Botstein, who came to us from the state, and Linda Johnson, who came to us from private practice, but who previously was employed with the municipality for a series of years, is very familiar with the municipality, and has really been able to jump right in. We moved one position from the civil division down to the criminal division, acknowledging that our criminal caseloads are really reaching the level of unconscionability, and we had more bandwidth on the civil side, so we did move a full PCN down to the criminal division. The criminal division had a number of vacancies this year, in part because we promoted 2 of our line criminal attorneys to become the new prosecutor, Sarah Stanley
and the chief assistant municipal prosecutor is now Aaron Bradley. At this point, they are full with the exception of one position. That's the crossover position designated to the district attorney's office, and they're in the process of advertising for that position. But otherwise, they finally have a full slate of prosecutors, which is a very positive development for that team.
So then the follow-on to that is a couple of years ago we were very creative with the state and sharing some law enforcement for some prosecution focused on municipal priorities. Do we have any agenda plan for that kind of creativity going forward, or is that something we're just kind of holding on?
Well, at this point, we are still, so that position, again, that's the vacant position right now. At the beginning of the summer, we moved Angela Garay, who had been in that position, back to the municipality because we were in essentially a state of crisis with staffing in the prosecutorial division, and she has a lot of experience and was feeling ready to come back to us, too. We had, I think Sarah Stanley is slated to give a full update on that to this body. I would say in the first few years of that partnership, we've had some growing pains. The state was in the process of setting up a specific sex crimes unit that our person was a part of, and there was some transition there, and then there was a transition in administration, so leadership of the office changed. But I think that there's been positive developments from there. They're much more organized in this area at the DA's office now, and it was just a matter of refilling that position. And the question of what we do with that person going forward is certainly one that I think we're assessing on an ongoing basis. If you recall, that position is there to prosecute recidivist domestic violence felonies that we felt were not being picked up adequately by the state. So folks who have numerous misdemeanor DV assaults to the point where it becomes a felony. But we did, when we started that talk, say, maybe we'll refocus this resource at some point if we think property crimes are more of a priority or something else. So I would encourage you to have that conversation with Ms. Stanley when she comes to talk with, I think, the Public Safety Committee. But for now, we're still focusing on the same initial emphasis on recidivist DV assaults.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested in what's happening with the prosecutor. And I think also that we've got a crisis there. So I would suggest you have a person in charge of that talk with the chair of the Public Safety Committee. If they're not interested, what I want to know is what are the caseloads there, what is the time, the percentage of them that get fled out, the number you have when you just make a triage decision to not proceed just because of the priority of the triage you have to do, and then the number of cases that are realistically a felony that the state chooses not to pick up, and so we started our recent crime waves maybe about 2017. And so I think all those categories will have a trend, over that period. And I think some of them are leveling out, part as a result of this administration's law enforcement stuff. But even that's added to the prosecutor's role. So I want to see the trend of those kind of things, just rough numbers and so on. So it is my strong opinion that that whole arm is woefully inadequate resources, and that all of the follow-through pieces are not working anywhere near what they should. So we want to know the information that'll help us make cogent decisions, and where are the choke places in the process that are keeping the best or right things happening.
Through the chair, I agree. I will ask Ms. Stanley to speak with the chair about coming to the Public Safety Committee to talk about that. I would agree with you that I think that the prosecutor's office is an area where we feel a lot of feel very stretched. Because we've invested in a larger police department, which means that we are arresting more people for more crimes, which then need to be prosecuted by the same number of people. So we have tried very hard. I've tried very hard to figure out a way to adequately resource that section within the department with our given resources, and that I've moved a person down there, taken them away from civil, tried very hard to support their salaries to the greatest extent possible, because We have a lot of turnover down there too because of low salaries, so we focused on that. You all appropriated additional funds specifically for that purpose 2 budget cycles ago. But that's certainly my wish list. You know, if we entered an area where we had additional revenue as a city, first on my wish list would be another prosecutor, another body down there just to carry to funnel some of that caseload to a new person.
Yeah, and I would suggest that prosecute, talk with the chair of public safety. I think that they will be very interested in that information. And the chair there is pretty informed, and maybe have even better questions, you know, but I would suggest that your person be prepared to answer that list plus any answers or stuff. The other philosophical thing is, are we going to pick up more felonies? And it's a very real fear on the part of this administration that if we do, the state will quit doing them completely, you know, and so on. But ultimately, I think we need to face that, and that's a philosophical question for you and the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dover.
Thank you. Now note, had the alcohol tax passed, it had public safety in there, and I think a prosecutor would have been a great use of that. One of the many great things we could have done had the alcohol tax passed. My question is about the defense contract. So when we talked about this a couple years ago when we were talking about felonies, but even with leaving felonies to the side, if we are prosecuting more cases, remind me, first of all, is that contract in your budget or does it live somewhere else?
Through the chair, it lives in my budget. We actually are in the process of increasing the level of that contract. Their caseload has also increased,
right.
And so I'm interested in us having adequate prosecution. I'm also interested in us having adequate and competent public defense. And so I think the initial increase is something that is low enough that it won't actually come back to this body. I believe we may be increasing next year's may come back to this body for approval because we are seeking to move them back up to essentially to the level they were at before the last round of contract renegotiation, with the specific caveat that they use any budgetary increase that they receive from us to hire another attorney so that they too can have a caseload that means they're able to really, again, provide an adequate and competent defense.
So I think I know the answer to this. I remember it from our last debate, but I want to reiterate or to confirm with you. We pay a flat rate, not a rate based on per, like a fee-for-service system. Is that right?
We do. We pay a flat rate per month that's up to a certain number of cases, and we do have a trigger that requires renegotiation. We're not quite at that trigger. It's kind of arguable, but we looked at their caseloads qualitatively and felt like, again, there's a certain level of caseload that becomes unconscionable for us to be asking someone to handle, and so we've again allocated another attorney to the prosecution, and so we're going to again give them the support to have another attorney on the defense side as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Okay, next is the mayor's office. So in the mayor's office, one of the things that happened in 2019 is they made, in combination of the normal salary adjustments we do for everything, for all of the departments, we made some adjustments to the full costing of the homeless coordinator and the communications director positions we reconciled those in 2019, so those are advancing into 2020. So there's some cleanup going on there. However, as part of that process, they were also challenged with coming in within the budget that they had, and so that related to a reduction of one special administrative assistant inside the mayor's office, so we have a position count going down of 1 in total. The mayor's office, similar, and many of you know this, but I'll note it here. While there's almost $2 million in the mayor's office, about $665,000 of that, almost half, is to the grant program, the community grant program. And so the balance of it is for the salaries inside the mayor's operating budget. So,
You're talking about money coming in or going out?
Going out.
So what do we spend money for grants for?
So we
Excuse
inside
me, Mr. Chair.
Good question, through the chair, Mr. Dyson. Inside the mayor's operating budget, they have basically labor and non-labor. As part of their non-labor, they have revenue, or they have money inside their budget that they allocate to nonprofits all across the municipality, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, United Way,
Okay,
whatever
I
it
got
might
it,
be.
I got it. Thank
And
you.
so,
Thank you.
there's a
Sorry.
selection process for that, and that actual amount of money has been going down. I think this is the first year it's not going down in the last 3 years. So,
Is that it?
That's all I have.
All right, Mr. Constant. Yeah, just to put my other hat on, working as a grant person, I can say that the grants from the municipality are the hardest grants to apply for. It's more complex often than the state and federal opportunities, and for way less money. At least it has been in the past. And so kudos to everyone who actually gets through that process and gets their applications in. Because the muni runs a really tight ship when it comes to every dime they give to a third-party person.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
Through the chair to Mr. Constant.
It's not this administration that created that.
I would respectfully disagree that this is more difficult than a federal grant. As a person who has applied for federal grants, state grants, nonprofit grants, and am blazingly familiar with the municipal grant process, I will tell you that while it can be difficult for some nonprofits to provide some of the information that we request that information specifically so that we know the stability of the organization, whether or not the money invested is going to be used in a way that will benefit longevity and stability with their programs. And the specific application process within the technical, online, et cetera, has improved greatly over the last 3 years. I agree with you that over the last 3 years, we have gone to an automated application process instead of paper only. The mayor's community grants and the arts community grants have undergone a total revamp from last year to this year so that it's even easier for access.
And I can say I haven't applied in 2.5 or more years. So. Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, in OMB's budget, basically it's going to be a continuation budget. We have a one-time ad in 2019 to help provide testimony in support of AWU in their rate cases. We put it in one time. We don't know if they're going to be doing rate cases, so that same amount of money, we're going to add that back in to 2020 because we do expect to be helping AWU with a rate case in 2020. So we'll put the $30,000 back in just to keep the consistency in the approach, and AWU supports us in that effort. And other than that, the same 5 positions that we have in our budget will be the same 5 positions we have next year.
I don't see any questions.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. On the Assembly's operating budget, Desiree wants to work from the bleachers so she can come sit next to me. So inside the Assembly's operating budget, in 2019, as you may recall, we had some one-time bit of money for some area-wide plan updates for Girdwood and South Addition. And then there was an adjustment to the insurance for the Federation of Community Councils while they were working on making some adjustments on how the Federation of Community Councils would help cover insurance for the community councils. And so, and then there was some one-time hit of money for some, in the first quarter for art wayfinding funding. Those will be removed, or they have been removed. We made some labor and adjustments based on the individuals in there. The one thing that we did add, similar to many other departments, primarily we talked about in Robin Ward's shop, they do have a lease obligation down at the Boat by Mail facility in Ship Creek. It's going to go up. They also have some contractual increases as a result of their audit that they need to be doing, so we added those in. And then those were continuations that we added rather than one-time adds. And then one of the requests that they had was an increase in the contractual services for interpretive services. And so that is an addition there. Two other things I'll just point out. I've been talking with the Assembly office and with Susie to try to figure out if we have the ability within the resources now to make some adjustments in the audio downstairs in 155. So we're trying to figure out how we can do that within the money that we have. And so, and if we are built, because and part of that decision has to do with the resulting cost of the new Granicus system inside the updates of PACE. So I think with some savings in there, and I've been talking to Barbara a little bit about how we might be able to balance that out. So we already have money in the bank to do those things. We approved those monies, I think, in 2015 to upgrade the system. So we're looking to see if we can find some resources there. And then, and I'm aware of at least one position inside the Assembly's office since the budgets went out as an election coordinator that we're trying to figure out how we might be able to address that. So we're looking inside their budget on how we can either move around what they have or if we do an S version. But so anyway, I think we've tried to accommodate the high priorities inside the Assembly office with our proposed budget. So I'll leave it at that unless I miss something that Desiree wants to add.
You have one question, Mr. President.
Thank you. If this is a long answer, we can take it offline. But,
it's a long answer.
But I'm curious about the last year's election and the use of that facility and the sort of volunteers and staffing around it, and just the length of time that it took to actually process it all.
Okay.
And what the plan is for this coming year, and how much that has to do with sort of our investment in staffing and volunteers. It was a very different process that we've seen in the past, obviously for a lot of reasons, but mostly I was surprised by the length of time that it took to process all of it and get the results out to the public in a timely manner. And so I just wonder if that's a staffing issue or that's just the nature of the process.
Don't quote me on this because I'm not the main election person, but I think that's kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to vote by mail and having a computerized system that's running ballots. I can follow up with Barbara about this when she gets back to it.
All right. We can. I can talk with her offline. Thanks very much.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, we still do have an election day, but you can't control when someone is going to mail that ballot in or when they're going to drop it off. And we do pick those ballots up daily from the drop boxes, and we're adding 2 additional drop boxes for this upcoming election. And the trend in other jurisdictions that have had vote by mail longer than we have is there's an increase in the number of voters who put them in the drop box every year. And so there'll be fewer and fewer people voting at the accessible vote centers and fewer people that will actually be mailing them in. And so if we get more people dropping them off earlier, we can have a larger number of ballots counted on the night of the election.
Right. Can I respond just really quick?
Sure.
The thing that surprised me was that I was there when this was happening. All the ballots from all the boxes, once it closed, were dropped off, but all the volunteers and staff went home.
Mm-hmm.
So that was different because in the past they stayed up all night and got through all of it and came out with a result. So that's what and then the next day it wasn't until 5 o'clock, you know what I mean? So I wondered if there was a staffing issue because all the ballots from all the boxes were on site that night, but they weren't counted. So I didn't know if that was a staff issue. Again, so I'll take it offline, but I think it may be a capacity issue in terms of staff.
And typically in the day before and the day of election day, approximately 50% of the ballots come in. So it's not physically possible to count them all unless we hire a lot of short-term people for 1 or 2, 3 days. And so, but there were none of the races changed after we counted additional ballots after the information that we had that was released on election night.
I think this is a great topic for the Elections Committee. There's a real natural flow that I've seen in the way ballots come in and how they're counted that it makes sense when I studied it real close that first year. And so, but the Elections Committee kind of heavily weighs through all the layers of this question.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thanks.
So a couple more here, and then I'm going to have to take a break and switch presentations. Equal Rights Commission. Stephanie, there's not much going on, and frankly, equal rights is a continuation budget with salaries and benefits. I know that they have a new executive director of the Equal Rights Commission who's, I think, coming on board next week, and the acting person, I just met with them and I let them know about the Equal Rights Commission budget, but as far as the budget's concerned, and then it's just a continuation, same position counts, no other changes, and contracts or any other needs that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Sure. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, that just raised a flag for me. We've actually hired someone to lead.
We made an offer to somebody, and I think they're going to start. Maybe Mr. Falsey can. They're talking about the manager for the Equal Rights Commission.
Yes, and this one is unique in our whole governmental system. The English Charter since 1975 says the Commission makes the pick of the Equal Rights Director. And I believe it's subject to confirmation, subject to approval by the mayor. I can verify that if you give me a second to Google it. Eventually, I suppose we can report that out in some way to the assembly. I just don't have full visibility of the process. I'm involved.
So it's not yet public?
What's that?
It's not yet public, this person's name?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think so.
We have an acting person down there, Stephanie.
Thank you. Ms. Davidson?
Same question, Ms. Gibby.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Outside of OMB, it's internal audit. Mike, you're picking it up, man. It's the last one. Maybe I'll put you first next year. Keep it on schedule. All right, so internal audit inside Mike's Chadwick's house. Salaries and benefits. The reason that this number is going down is that the individuals that they had a lot of folks that had a lot of seniority and some individuals that were that had retired or left. And so the total amount of the salary adjustments inside internal audit is going down next year. So that's why that number is decreased. And then other than that, there's really no changes going on in internal audit. I think Mike and I have conversations throughout the year of what's going on in departments and internal audits. And so I appreciate the work and the cooperation that he gives us inside OMB. I don't have any other things to add for internal audit.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
You know, I appreciate the reports. I think for a lot of what you do, that someone's watching is a good incentive to pay attention to the rules and so on. So I appreciate your reports. I would say one small thing, which probably wouldn't save more than a decimal point on this, but you give us those really nice blue-bound reports.
Yes.
Then we get them in our binder as well. And for me, I just assume get them stapled or maybe even just get them that once. I intently have them. They're sitting on my table. I don't read them until they're in our binder anyway. So.
Okay, we can look at that.
Yeah. I want the bound.
I don't need to blue.
I don't either. Stay the
Yeah,
way.
usually the members of the committee will get them emailed, and then we review them. But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Franks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So if a certain department was to have a special kind of audit, like for example, we talked to the last audit committee meeting, I think it was the last one, about cybersecurity, and a pretty involved test might cost, you know, a couple $100,000 and to fully audit it. Would that come out of your budget, or would it be charged to the department?
Mr. Francis, the chair, that it depends. There's been times where we have had those types of things come to our department. For example, Zig, who was hired by the Assembly to look at SAP, that was a contract that was managed through our department. So it depends. It has happened in the past. Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Video.
Actually passed, thank you.
Okay. All right, don't have any other questions. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to need a couple minutes here to switch presentations before we get into the utilities. If you guys take 5 minutes, that'd be great.
Take a short break.
I appreciate the words. We'll try to get back on schedule.
Hey, Fred. Fred?
Which question?
I go and I cut with prongs, and I only leave a few and I pull much, and so I can spiral by where.
That's not true.
I had been saving. Sorry to.
I'm going to get us back on schedule by skipping ACDA.
So the union, do you think because they held elections?
Buy-in on the AO that we were working on, it's going to be submitted. Okay.
Do you have her phone number? Can I give you a number that you can reach her at?
Okay, for texting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Well, that's what was
Okay.
frustrating to me, is that all the ballots were there.
But the thing is, they can't work on it. They're in a room that whole board.
Just got a
Why
call
don't they
for
have
it, but
election
it
night
didn't show
in
me.
every
Well, I
room?
totally agree.
And
Yeah.
Have it up at the Medina Center
and they
But I've got her in contacts here somewhere.
Cost, cutting costs, but that's not good. It's the one time a year, election night, English Johnson, is you bring people together, so people haven't seen each other, and since the last election, there's a lot
There
involved.
it is. Mobile is 351-1430.
You have a press box, you have all that stuff going.
30.
And then
30.
put
Great.
people out in the dark.
Thank you.
Light
Yeah,
it up.
she's really a neat lady.
You saw me there. I don't need more people to be there. And I tried to stop it, but they.
It's always
And that is one of the fallout of the whole.
great to run into people that your estimation of it keeps going up instead of
Less excited about that, even if we don't get all of them, but if we were able to count all of the.
She served a couple terms on the school,
Yeah.
which is a grand introduction.
Actually, yeah, he could hit the ground
There'll
running.
still be a
Yeah.
vinyl because
Thank you.
for
I'm
mail in,
gonna text him
anything
now.
after.
Hit Bill on that.
You get a better idea of what's going on, but you don't.
You don't need a copy, right?
Election night in the same place.
Partially left.
And then
I got mine. Got
we're
yours?
set up to take the recon.
Yes.
That's what happens.
So far, so good?
Well done.
Thank you.
I learn a little something every time I do it.
You won't let me.
But I appreciate knowing your thoughts. I haven't quite off. I remember now. I remember.
Yeah,
Impressive.
I had arrived early because I was concerned with what I had to touch me. I arrived earlier concerned about that whole story.
Don't give them more information than they require.
Note to self.
Well, yeah.
It's good. But on the other hand, it's a rare opportunity you guys get a chance.
So we took the cross.
So I kind of let it go.
Yeah, I saw her asking about it.
But you can,
Yeah.
you know, the interest here, it would be all. I think you guys keep all jammed up. I'm very I tried to him.
So I was gonna say a little bit about that.
Life in the eye. Yeah, right. But I think it's an opportunity.
I've been working since 6 a.m.
I can turn it into.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, ready for a party? We've been real tough if you haven't heard. We're coming at you hard. He takes some. It wasn't you, it was behind you. Yeah, it was behind you. Sorry, gentlemen. Yeah, sorry.
I thought the results came out by.
John,
All right, guys, let's get going.
I thought it was Amy's.
Because all the ballots that have been counted up to that point, the results came out.
Let me try to be louder.
All right, guys, let's get going, please. Let's take a seat.
All right. Here, for the next hour and a half, hour and something minutes, we're going to talk about the Utilities and Enterprise and Community Development Authority. But what I'd like to do is just change the order of the day a little bit and start with Anchorage, start with the water utility, and then we'll go back to ACBA, and then we'll go to the port. So I appreciate the departments being here on time, and I apologize for being a little behind schedule. So I'm going to go straight to the water utility. We should have, I think it's probably like the 8th slide in your deck. So for the, and I'm going to give a very high-level overview, and all of these utilities have a lot of detail. The presentations in these departments are different than general government. We've included basically a reconciliation page that you have for every utility. In the department, they have 2. Solid waste, they have 2. ACBA does not. It's just that they're managed a little bit differently. And then for each one of those, you will see a 8-year summary of how they're looking for their finances, and for each utility, you'll see a sheet for revenues and expenses, and for each utility that has a capital program, you'll see a sheet for that. So there is a lot of information here, and I think what I'd like to do is curb the conversation a little bit. If you guys have comments or questions on this stuff, I'm going to try to highlight the big things, and if we don't get through them, we'll pick it up. We'll make another appointment. But let's start with the water utility. So Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, when you look at the top line in their positions, they have 283 full-time positions. For them, which is a little different than solid waste, each one of those positions, they can work in the water utility or the wastewater utility. How they're actually funded, we know that. We get that from the department. And so you'll see 283 people in the water utility and 283 in the wastewater. That does not mean they have 600 people. That just means that's what they have. For the utility and all of the utilities, this year we've been working, one of the benefits that we've had inside SAP is that we can actually look into the financials for all of the departments a little bit better than we had in the past, or a little different than we had in the past. And then the other thing that other departments, and particularly AWU, I think they're really doing what they can to shore up their equity. And I think you'll see that as a part of the kind of decisions they're making inside to secure their debt to equity by managing their capital program. So inside the water utility, as far as the positions are counted, and then there's really no change. And to a comment or question to Ms. LaFrance mentioned earlier, this is an important difference in the utilities for general government. You will see that the total proposed budget for the utility is $63,600,000. The depreciation and amortization for this utility is $13.6 million. When you appropriate the budget, the amount of money that they're going to spend out the door is that last number, that 51. So when you look in your AM or your documents, you're going to see an appropriation amount. You're going to see that 51. You're not going to see the 63. But that's why we have to look at their entire budget. So I just want it's going to be a mirror for every single one of those, and I wanted to be able to share that with you. But really, inside their operating world, there's really no significant changes. I mean, we do the one-times in and out. I mean, really, so there's really no big, and I don't mean to move us rapidly here, but in the water utility, I don't think there's any big changes on this side. When you look at the 8-year summary, I think the thing that I want to point out is if you look in the box that goes vertical there, 20 to 2020, you'll see that their net income is down a little bit in 2020, but you'll look at that, when you look at the 8-year summary, it's progressively going up. And I think for all of the utilities, those numbers are going up, or if they're in a negative situation, they're getting better every year. And so for the water utility, that's an important piece. About the 5th line down, their capital program, they had about a $50 million capital program. This year in the water utility, it's about 25. It looks exactly the same, almost the same inside the wastewater utility when we get there. And I think the last thing I want to mention is, down probably on the bottom there, you look at the debt to equity ratios at about 60-40, maintains that. No rate increases in the water utility. And then the water utility will be also be providing a dividend to the municipality in 2020. Okay. The revenues and expenses. I apologize. This is I think it's a very important piece for the utility, for all of the utilities. And so on the revenues and expenses sheet, I think the only thing I want to mention here is that you'll notice in the far right-hand column the change in when you look at their total revenue all the way over to the right, it's 0.6%. Part of the variety of things, but part of that has to do, they're not going to be having any rate increases, and without a rate increase, assuming everything else is going the same, they're not generating any revenue. They're not generating a significant amount of revenue. So I think that's an important piece there. And then you'll see in the middle of this sheet, and I will point to them and to the other ones, the transfer of MUSA dividends and gross receipts for AWU. That number difference between 2019 and 2020 is a $2 million increase. I'm looking at slide 10. 1.6 of that is the dividend, and about 460,000 of that is in MUSA for the water utility. And then I think the last thing I want to mention is, you know, the things at the bottom when you look at the net income loss for non-operating expenses, a lot of that stuff's out of their control. A lot of it has to do with the market. You guys are flipping your pages. Are you with me?
No.
Okay, Chris, we're looking at page 10.
On 10.
On the
Looking for
bottom,
the lines.
non-operating expenses.
We don't have numbers.
No, yeah, it is, bottom left corner, way at
Bottom
the
left
tiny
corner.
little writing. Okay, non-operating expense, so the lowest block on the table.
Yep. So.
Above the double line.
Yep. Thank you. Again, I'll slow down. No, I was going too fast. But a lot of these things here, the interest in the bond indebtedness, that the information we get is from public finance, and then obviously the amortization of debt. And then the big thing is other earned interest expenses. There's no really influence from the utility on that. That's basically how the market is doing. So those things they really can't control very much. And so other than the revenues and expense side from the budget piece, I'm not concerned about anything on the revenues and expense side, given what they're doing to manage their equity and what they're doing for the rate increases. So I think that's a lot on the operating side of the world.
No, we are on page 10. Oh, it doesn't show up.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Does it not show up? Sorry.
But we're right here though. We're on
So I have one question for you, Ms. Solitaire.
Thank you. So on that bottom right-hand corner in net income loss, it's negative 43.5%. That number jumps out at me. Can you just give me a little bit of context?
Because this is the change in just the non-operating expense and the loss. And so this is the changes in their interest. Bond debt went down about 4%, and so they're, and then the biggest one is the interest during construction. I'm probably going to have to ask for a lifeline on that one, but I think that's basically a reduction in the interest on construction projects. So again, a lot of that's from public finance, but maybe Mark can jump in on grant. But most of this stuff comes from public finance.
So each double, just so I'm understanding your chart.
Yep.
So each double line is a full stop, and then
Yep.
we move on to the next category. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, thank you.
No, that's totally fine. I'm
Yep.
sure I understand.
My bad.
Thank you. Mr. Whittleton?
We had something with Cluton and Powder Ridge that was like a huge amount of money. Is that in here somewhere?
That is in the, well, this is operating. That would be, through the chair, that would be the capital side.
Okay, I actually have one more question before we get to capital. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the two pieces that you mentioned. I am interested in both the transfers as at a 24.1% change, and also the interest during construction. Just those are two of the largest changes in here. I just wanted to get an explanation on those.
I'll start with the transfers in MUSA and dividends and growth. So in 2019, that total amount of money was $8.7 million. The change is that there's going to be an additional an expense to the utility and a benefit to the general government. They're going to expense $1.6 million, and they're going to give us a check for dividend, which is an expense to the utility. That's about 1.6 of the $2 million. They also contribute to MUSA for this utility. That's about $400,000. So that's an expense to them. So the amount of money and expense for MUSA and the dividends coming out of the utility, in this case, we are receiving it. That's going to be $10 million. So that's a 24% increase in an expense.
Correct.
And then, Mr. Perez-Verdia, I'm going to have to get back to you on the interest on the construction because I want to get you a better answer.
I don't see any other questions on operating.
Okay, let's go to the water utility on the capital side. Honestly, I think what we have here for their general work, the type of work that they're doing is the type of work they've done in the past. The difference is that the amount of the work that they're going to be proposing in their capital budget next year is less than they had. And I'm pretty sure, but if I'm wrong, Mark or Grant can correct me, none of the earthquake expenses, the fixes that they're going to be doing in the earthquake are in this capital program. They're not going to illustrate, they're not going to be illustrated in here. If they have any of those expenses, they're going to be working them outside the capital program. So I think it's just a point.
That's the equivalent question, right?
I'm looking for Power Bridge or something.
Through the chair, that's on the prior year's capital budget, so it's already approved. In other words, this is for new stuff going forward. So the money has been approved, and so that's already in the CIP, but remember, that's not going anywhere until there's assembly action and approval. We don't have a final deal on that issue.
So there's projects that, okay, they were previous years, they're just not listed here. This is new
Correct.
stuff coming forward.
Yes.
Okay, hey, and you have a plan, you have like a multi-year plan, and all that stuff will be listed in there.
The water, yes, well, we have a CIP and our CIBs, and so we have we keep track of all those projects, old and new, to answer your question, yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay, let's move on to the wastewater utility. So, I think on the wastewater utility, again, 283, we talked about that. I think similar to the water utility, when they put more assets in service, their depreciation starts to kick in. So that's why that number starts. Well, that expense, that 785 is an important piece. And then on the wastewater side, the MUSA contribution is going to be about $1 million. And remember, MUSA for all the utilities is inside the cap. And then I think there's really nothing else that I'd like to point out on the operating side, unless you have particular questions.
I don't see any.
Okay, let's go on to the 8-year summary. Again, I want to point out about the fourth line down, the capital improvement program. I'm on slide 14, the numbers in the bottom left. The capital program is going down. You know, one of the things for this utility, for the port that we've done, we're working through Merrill Field and for SWS, is that we're working with them. If they have capital programs that have projects that are identified to be funded with equity, and they haven't advanced those things in 2 or 3 years, we're scrubbing those things for two reasons. One, maybe the project's done, but the equity's still being held, so it counts against them in their debt to equity ratio. So we scrub that out and put that equity back on their books rather than it being set aside for capital. So working with them to clean these things up allows them a couple things. One, to true up the capital projects they're actually going to do, and if they continue year after year after year, great. That's a good thing. They may get delayed to environmental issues or supply issues, but helping us and helping them clean that stuff up is, I think, a very good thing. So onside there, not just this utility, but all of them. And then again, in the wastewater, there's no rate increase in the wastewater utility.
I do have a question on this one. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Looking at, there's 2 lines I need to look at. One is the construction cash pool and the total outstanding long-term debt. So in 2021, you double from this year, then it goes down substantially in 2022, and then it really ratchets up in 2023. What's going on there? And then there's also between 2022 and 2023 in long-term debt, like a $50,000+ increase.
Through the chair, the first one, construction cash flow, the big change in 2023 that we forecasted, which may or may not occur, is the Girded wastewater treatment facility. It's kind of in the budget book. Basically, we are still working on a permit through DEC on that, and the anticipated potential upgrade is in 2023. The estimation of that project is anywhere from $30 to $50 million.
Okay.
And what was the second question?
The outstanding long-term debt, which is same year, is probably the same deal?
Yes, it would be.
Thank you.
Other questions on that?
Okay. On revenues and expenses, I think the only thing that I want to, point out here is in the middle group, the middle block under operating expenses, you'll see that they have a 4% increase in their expense in total. But when you look at the bottom line of total operating expenses in 2019, it's about $52.4 million. And in 20, it's $54.3 23 to 54.5 million. And the difference is $2 million. 1.6 of that is the dividend. Oh, no, my mistake. That's about the change in the transfer and use of depreciation. So that's the change, the big changes in that. The wastewater utility is not paying a dividend.
Dividend restrictions.
Yeah. On the capital side, I don't think I have anything that I'd like to, obviously, we have questions about the capital program, the capital projects, and like the general government, you have particular interest in even one of these. I know that the King Street projects, we've been doing a lot of improvements out of the facility at King Street for the last 2 or 3 years. And so they have quite an investment out there on the facilities. But other than that, I can't point to anything that there's no Academy Drive on their list. So there's nothing drawing a lot of attention. That's an inside joke. You were here last week.
Okay. You afraid? Yeah.
All right. So let's have some questions on their capital program.
Yeah. How, I guess that this bond has already been issued, but we have a major project on RECA coming up to redo all the storm drains, and there's a lot of other infrastructure in there too. And I know that AWU's been along Pine Street all summer. So can you speak a little bit about what your relationship is to that project?
Through the chair, the Pine project you're talking about?
The upcoming project along RECA. And is that at all reflected in your budget, or is that entirely in sort of a PM&E bond or whatever that means?
Interesting question through the chair. If it's stormwater, it would be completely under PM&E at this point in time, because that would be an art self-funded project if it's just stormwater. Our water and sewer infrastructure, we have rehab in the past over there, honestly, if you're familiar with the area. The specific project you're talking about, why we're at Pine Street a lot right now, is this came up during the joint assembly workshop, or joint assembly meeting at the borough on our septic station up there at Pine, or Turpin.
Yeah.
And Turpin dumps in a large interceptor, sewer interceptor, and that wraps through Pine as a 40-inch interceptor. It's full of solid debris.
Yeah.
Which is why one of the things on there requires non-recirculating equipment. We need that we can't hire contractors to do that work because they're all over the 48. They don't handle them, but they're an arm and leg to get up here, so we want our own equipment when we're doing that work. But it's taken a lot. It's a very efficient way of cleaning the pipe, but that pipe is very, very full. We've had a lot of sanitary sewer overflows in that over the year that's caused backups in neighborhoods. So that's why we're there. The more we clean it, the more stuff will pull out. Once we clean it, we'll inspect it, verify it's in good shape. If not, we'll do some work out there. So we don't know. There could be future work in that area. But right now, that's one of the liabilities we're working with, and we've got the plan to manage that.
So because the Matsu Borough is dumping so much stuff into Turpin, the neighborhood in my district is...
That is the short, easy answer, but it's not just the borough. We take all.
Sure.
We take all. And there's, you ignore the communities dump their waste there. The leachate from the landfills goes there as well.
Sure.
It all contributes. That's why, as you heard, our plan is to limit the use of that facility in the future to just leachate, which has less solids, and then focus on King Street for doing upgrades because it doesn't have the same issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And looking at the last line on page 16, heat to power conversion. I wasn't familiar we were doing that.
Through the chair. So yeah, we're looking at that all our facilities. Where it's economically feasible to do CHP, combined heat power. What that is, it's an economic. Well, we have a large facility that draws a lot of electricity and has a lot of heat demand. That becomes a more economic way of doing that. It's an analysis initially, and if it pans out, we'll go ahead and do that. But we're looking to do energy recovery throughout our facilities. Honestly, that's just one of the tools in the bucket.
So you're hoping maybe to generate some of the power that you're currently using from the warmth of the water?
Yeah, well, no, it'd actually it's a generator that has a lot of heat offset that you can then heat buildings with. And the northern utilities, northern climates, I should say, it's very economic way of doing things.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Going back to the Turpin thing, so we have a pipe, and there's no equipment up here to It seems odd to have built a pipe that there's no feasible way to maintain.
So, through the chair, that's an issue around the whole United States. We can clean it, but it's very inefficient, and it doesn't do it. You got to set up bypass pumping. It becomes the issues we're running into now. We can pull off our gear every day. It's a very mobile piece of equipment, and it does it very efficiently. It pulls out a lot of debris. It drives and it does a good job. The way the conventional technologies you use for that, we're pulling out as much debris in a week that it used to take us 3 months, 3 or 4 months. It's just the nature of the equipment now. Getting back to that topic, it's almost like mine dredging equipment. So the people that have done that Lower 48, they've got a niche market and they are very expensive. And we've been through this process. We've been trying to purchase things for years. And in the Lower 48, they clean tunnels as big as this building. They're just huge monster tunnels. So it is kind of a niche equipment. They have a niche market. They're very tight with their proprietary tooling and stuff like that. So we had to go through some legal issues, but we eventually worked an agreement with that one with the large manufacturers that's good to do it. But keep in mind, like you alluded to, this was an afterthought throughout the United States. People have had these large diameter sewage trucks around the United States, and they have had troubles cleaning if they have to. And it's an issue.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, do you know offhand what we spent last year on the sewer emergency repairs for Campbell Lake?
Through the chair, it was a couple $1 million, I believe. It was over $1 million. But that is a recoverable expense that we're going to recover through FEMA. It doesn't mean it wasn't. It was an earthquake incident. We never had a sewer overflow. To remind everyone, and it was repaired quickly, efficiently, and we are going to get recovered through FEMA on that one. But it was certainly over $1 million combined effort.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, that is an interesting question that definitely begs some exploration of who pays for what and why, separate from the question of the emergency incident. But a sewer system is a citywide issue, right? It's a collector for all kinds of flow from the mountains to the ocean. So, interesting topic. Now, you are suggesting that it was brought up this waste heat conversion. Waste heat recovery is really big in the north, except in Alaska. It's really surprising how little we implement it. Do you have conversations with the other utility heads on how we can tap into that, even buildings, just buildings?
Through the chair, that's the municipality has that resilient sub-cabinet committee, and so that's one of the things that all the different departments are working on.
It definitely is a place we should be expanding. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
So I know that you want to hear about the port, but I'm going to move us back to Mr. Halpro. If we could go back to get us back on. Start with Andrew and go back to the port. So Steve, if you showed up late, just making sure that you were hanging with us. Been here for 3 hours. We've got to do something. All right, ACBA. I think the things that I wanted to talk about, and Andrew can, for those of you who don't know about the business, basically they have a development business and they have a parking business, and for most of their life they've been in the parking business until about the last couple of years, and so a lot of the changes that they have been making recently are related to the development side of the house, and so inside their budget, inside their Anchorage Community Development Authority for revenues and expenses. The bottom, there's really no big changes going on inside the department. They have their labor change is pretty small overall inside on total costs going up. Their contract services are pretty steady. And then they do have some other changes going on. Their depreciation right now is projected to be pretty flat, and so I don't have anything to add to the revenues expense side of the house. Their capital side is basically upgrades to the facilities that they own, mostly in the garages, obviously. And Andrew can speak to where those are and what kind of questions about that. And that's obviously making some investments in their IT.
I do have one question on this slide. Mr. Portillo?
Yeah, no, I just want to build off what you just asked. I guess I'm wondering about the status of the downtown parking facility and where the costs of changes in that are in this budget.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
apologize.
It's okay. The question was what the status is of the changes to the downtown parking facility and where the costs of those are in this budget.
Okay, so I need you to drill down a little bit more because we have 3 parking garages. So when you say
Downtown,
okay,
transit center. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
I'm specifically talking about that.
So the transit center. So that, and I appreciate the question. As you know, and I've reported for the last 3 years, we let an RFP in December of 2017 to redevelop the transit center. We spent. When the mayor came on board, that was his priority. His first priority to me was to live at the transit center until we found a solution for it. The solution was the thing needed to be shut and gutted. That was the solution. We put out an RFP in December of 2017. We awarded the contract to Dave Irwin and Mark Lewis, 2 developers. Over the last 2 years, the project has been very challenged. It's a very complex project. Basically, what you're talking about is building pre-fabricated steel modules in China, shipping them here, and bolting them on to the front of the parking garage. It's never been done before here. So the permitting process, the inspection process, how does that look like? When we awarded the RFP, we had an initial timeline. That timeline has been adjusted a number of times. We did the last adjustment, our board approved the last adjustment to the timelines in September. We have told the developer that we feel like this is the last best chance. I feel more comfortable today about the project than I have in the last 3 years. We think they're partnerships together. They have the money. They're making all the right steps. They've begun engaging the permitting department, planning department on their bulk variance and some of the other entitlements that need to be addressed with the city. They brought in their architects to redesign and reimagine the concept. Right now, what it is going to be is they're actually, if you look out the window at the 6th Avenue parking garage, they're going to add 2 floors to that on the hotel side. So it'll be a 150-room boutique, nationally branded boutique hotel called Indigo. And then there will be 32 basically studio 1-bedroom apartments on the east side. So it'll be a hotel apartment complex combined with the restaurants. They really have done some good work. And our board has struggled the last 2 years trying to get the developer to move ahead. There's been some hiccups on their side. There's been some struggles on trying to identify the permitting and inspection process, but we think we have those all mapped out. But again, we expect construction to begin at the Transit Center in April of 2020. And so what we anticipate is again, this is not an impact on local taxpayers. We are working with the developer. We've signed a long-term lease that was approved by the Assembly, I believe, in May. So the Transit Center project is moving along. Just as a side note to that, when you look under our operating budget, you'll see contract services. Assemblymember LaFrance asked this question last year about the cost of contract services. When you look at that number, the 2019 approved budget of $1.2 million for this year, roughly $700,000 of that will go to security. That is a private security firm that I pay to police the transit center and our 3 garages. That expense has not come down. When I first took this job in July of 2015, our annual costs were $550,000. This year, I think they'll be at $750,000. It is indication of the challenges that we face downtown. It is indication of the responsibilities that my organization maintains at the transit center with regards to holding and securing public inebriates until ASP shows up. This is our cost. We do not get reimbursed for this. This is my single biggest line item next to labor, is security. So the desire the last 2 or 3 years in redeveloping the transit center is once we have a new development there, we will save significantly on security. We'll still have a security presence, but it'll be much smaller. I will tell you that our security presence and our security protocols that we have introduced the last 3 years have taken a significant burden off APD. My first year here at the end of 2015, we had an annual of about 550 calls to APD every year. This year, if we hit 100, I'll be surprised. And
This year what?
This year, if we hit 100, I would be surprised. That is due to really two things. Number one, it's due to us limiting the space availability at the transit center. As you know, for the last year and a half, we basically shut down 80% of the footprint. You can clearly see on this east side, matter of fact, I was mentioning to somebody, before we shut down the east side of the transit center, I mean, you had people milling around and loitering on that sidewalk right out in front of, City Hall right across. There's nobody there anymore because we've moved the transit center to the west end of the building. Therefore, people are migrating and tended to migrate away from that area where there's no activity. We feel that once the hotel and the redesigned transit center space is launched, then we'll be able to save significant amount on security and janitorial. So when you look at these two these two contract services, $700,000 of that is security, another $500,000 of that is janitorial. And again, I mean, those are costs that we recoup through operations, but those are costs that we have to maintain in order to keep clean and safe facilities. And a lot of these costs are driven by, the social issues downtown. I mean, we're going through a hell of a conversation with the Simon Mall because, there's a significant blame game going on, right? I mean, I think we all recognize that homeless and what's happening on the streets is a community problem. I mean, it's not a parking problem. It's not a downtown problem. It's a community problem. And I think most of us downtown are struggling to maintain and secure our facilities, but we're doing a pretty damn good job.
Thank you. I have a few questions for you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Andrew, as you can imagine, I hear from folks in the downtown a lot, and the one thing I heard about this month is the reduction of services to the ADP, the Downtown Partnership. Can you walk us through what's happening there in this budget and what your thoughts are?
Sure. We are ADP's single largest contributor, and we have been for more than a decade. Every year, I give them a combination of cash and in-kind donations, about $100,000. We specifically give them $60,000 every year to support their summer programs. Coming into this budget year, there was no way I could afford to do that. I mean, we have lost considerable revenue streams. We lost Nordstrom, which is $30,000 a year. We lost. There were two other pieces of business we lost, and then we've got two parking lots that we just renewed with the city that are two of our largest revenue generators that are now on month to month. So we have a lot of doubts as far as our current revenue streams into the future. We're also struggling, as Lance said, for the first 10 years of our organization until this mayor was elected. We relied primarily on parking revenues. There was very little to our development side with the exception of North Point Bluff, and that was just basically selling empty lots. Over the last 3 years, as we know, the recession hit in 2015. You can tell from parking revenues the last 3 years have been soft. So during a time of recession, our organization has tried to make a dramatic switch from a parking to a development. So you're trying to develop things and build things in a down economy. We told ADP that although I can't commit formally to the $60,000, we will try and backfill. I think we've got a couple of opportunities, contracts in the first quarter. I told Amanda that I would try to do the best I can to backfill. But this is my warning. I mean, a year ago, I think this week, the Anchorage Downtown Partnership Executive Committee came into my conference room and said that they were going to cancel fireworks because they didn't have the cash. This was last October. And of course, my team, we said, no way, we're not canceling fireworks. So we scrambled and came up with $20,000 to save fireworks. If not for us, there wouldn't have been fireworks. And I mean, we have constantly gone above and beyond to try and support downtown. But at some point in time, charity begins at home. And I just simply, with all the revenue strains and the questions, the delays in some of our projects, we cut back a lot of people this year. At the end of the day, this year we will still donate about $330,000 in in-kind services, in parking, free parking to Iditarod, for Ronde, APP, for all their events. And again, we look at this in New Year's Eve as a perfect example. $20,000 we invested in saving New Year's Eve fireworks, to me, was an investment in the restaurants and the food trucks and the vendors. That night in parking, we generated net income, or not net income, gross income of $3,300. So, but to me, that's an investment in the community. It's not sustainable. And I think, Amanda's done a good job recognizing that, there's a changing landscape. And we talked this year, we've agreed this year that we are going to donate our parking lot, our Chinook lot behind the Sunshine Mall for fireworks this year, New Year's Eve fireworks. So they don't have the permitting and some of the costs. So we're continuing to work with them. But, my budget's no different than anybody else's in this room. It's tight, and we're trying to do more with less.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Salaton.
Thank you. On this, and this might be a Lance question or a Mr. Halper question, but does this budget always usually run at a deficit with a cash infusion?
It does, and this is a little bit difficult. We do not fund depreciation. We haven't. We are very cash positive this year on $850,000 cash positive through September. We're very cash positive. We cannot cover depreciation. There's simply no way. But how we address that without covering depreciation the last 3 or 4 years is, as you'll see with our capital improvement, we have a very aggressive maintenance schedule with our garages. The garages are 35 years old, 35 years old. They require a lot of maintenance and upkeep. What happened was we went in the early aughts, we went a good 5 or 6 years without investing any money in our garages. So we had, over the course of 3 or 4 years I've been here, we've invested probably $6 million in repairing our garages. So although, if you back out depreciation, we are always cash positive. I mean, right now my organization has $3 million in the bank and change, and we're working on several projects. So covering the depreciation, our board has made the determination that there's simply no way we can fund depreciation and still do the things downtown wants us to do.
I would add through the chair, though, that this is a case where depreciation is something you should pay attention to, because if you keep operating in that fashion and you have to replace a garage and you haven't saved any money for it, that's the whole purpose of depreciation guides you, is to save that money so that when you have to spend 30 to 40 million to build a new garage, that you have the money.
I just wanted to make an observation. I appreciate the work on the downtown transit center, and just be mindful that we're just not pushing the problem or the issues around to another part of downtown. So I just wanted to make that comment.
We struggle with that. And again, people land at the transit center because it's the only big open warm space in downtown. The building was built in 1984 with the idea that it was going to be a gathering place, and society has changed in the last 35 years, and now sometimes it's not so good if people gather. So, we are struggling with that. We don't want to push people out on the streets, but at the same time, we operate a facility. We're responsible for that facility. We're responsible for our customers and our employees in those facilities. And we have to take steps to secure the premise. And if that means moving people along, that's what we have to do.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thanks. Just following on that, you dispersed a crime center. That's where the chicken hawks and drug dealers used to hang out. That and Covenant House parking lot. So, the dispersal rather point. But why would someone want to invest in a business in a hotel on top of our parking garage? Our friend Bill Popp says medical services, air freight, and tourism are the only things that are increasing, in our town. And the experts say we're not even sure we've bottomed out on our recession. So why would anybody want to invest here? You and I want them to, but why would they? And Chris, he really does too.
Well, I can certainly speak to 2 projects that we're working on. First is the transit center. I think the developer sees a niche for a boutique hotel. There's nothing currently like it in the marketplace. They've eyed the market for 6 or 7 years.
Cheap prices?
No, high end, cheap. We're talking $13 martinis. This is a very niche brand.
Okay, go on.
You know, and they feel like their market research shows that, you know, because of A, the tourist season, and B, mainly their location. Across from City Hall, blocking the
All right,
line.
I hope they're right.
I do too.
Right.
And it's not my money, it's theirs, but they're smart people, and I feel comfortable looking at their pro forma that they're gonna be able to make this work.
I think they're darn fools, but I hope I'm wrong.
But I mean, the second project we're working on is our 3 lots at 8th and K, and we're in conversations with a local developer. We actually have lawyers involved crafting a development agreement, so we've agreed on the basic points for the construction of 39 units and a level of structured parking at the corner of 8th and K on those city lots. So that'll add 39 units to the 40 that Elizabeth Place will be opening with, to the 32 at the transit center. I mean, that means in the last 6 years, you're going to put 100 plus new units on the thing. And the local developer has faith. I mean, this is a small, good local developer, and he has faith, and he wants to build downtown.
May his tribe increase.
What's that?
I said, may his tribe increase. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
If you build it, they will come. I've heard that somewhere before. Andrew, you know, as I recall, when oil prices dropped a couple of years ago, we started in this recession, that oil companies laid off numerous employees, and a lot of those had monthly contracts for parking. Has our monthly contract for parking started to rebound yet?
Actually, they've started to rebound, but not for that reason. In December of 2015, January 2016, really during the height of the spice epidemic, we suffered some really rough weeks in the 6th and 7th Avenue Garage. It was a spice epidemic with the opioid epidemic, a lot of smash and grabs, just a brutal 30, 40 days. We lost a good chunk of business to the state garage because our tenants, our customers felt like our garages just simply won't sell. And this was in December of 2015, so, you know, I mean, we had been on the job for 3 months, and you got hit by that spice. So over the last 2 or 3 years, we made significant investments in our facilities. The 7th Avenue Garage, as you see, you know, we've improved the lighting and the stairwells. We put a rooftop park on top of it. And over the last 6 months, we pretty much gained back all of the parkers that we lost. So it's been less of a downturn in the economy and more of just public safety problems. And the 6th and 7th Avenue garages really took a hit because that's the epicenter, that's the transit center, where the spice and opioids, you know, that was the epicenter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Just a point for the record, a $13 martini is Fletcher's, not the crow's nest. So,
it's all right.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, not so much on budget, but we changed the rules for Saturday parking.
Yes.
And has that been successful in terms of encouraging more turnover? And have there been any problems with the change in that structure?
There's been no problems. And if there has been problems, they've been operator error, meaning customers, just haven't been paying attention. I thought, my team did a fabulous job with the rollout. We did not enforce for the first 3 or 4 months. We wrote warnings. We only wrote tickets to those who were repeat offenders. I think we've done a really good job. The merchants are very happy with it. We've had some that were kind of our biggest critics, and now they absolutely love it because they see those spaces turning over in front of their business. The only heat we're getting are from people that were parking there all day, like the hot dog vendors and the ice cream cone vendors. I mean, they're the people that want to park right next to it and unload their cart. I mean, those are the only people that complain. And
that's why they did it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Good. Thanks. Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, just on that note, I went to a show. It was a matinee of some kind, and the show was just over 2 hours. And I felt threatened because of the parking rules. And I know I could have found a garage somewhere and paid to park on a Sunday, But anyhow, so I wonder sometimes if that 2-hour line isn't maybe slightly tight compared to what some of the other ongoing functions are in the downtown that have a slight larger window.
And we talked about that, especially lately, we talked about moving that from 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah, because
that was
It
part
shortens
of-
the performance.
I believe that.
I
believe that.
I mean, you gotta look at it both ways.
I believe that requires a code change.
Right, and so that was one issue. It's like it just seems slightly tight for some of the functions you might find yourself doing in the downtown.
Yeah, no, and I would be totally happy with 3 hours, but, you know, that's a code issue. We also need to work with the assembly on addressing hotel loading zones. You have some hotels out there that have entire curb space that they're not paying for. That could use some meters, and let's not forget that every time somebody plugs $1 into a meter, 5 cents comes back through property tax relief right under the cab. So, I mean, I think there's areas, you know, we're cognizant. What we've done the last 6 months is we've identified several areas where we've historically had purview, or it's been our domain to put in parking meters, and we've been slow to. You know, for your information, I mean, we're really looking at East Anchorage towards Gamble. There's quite a few state employee offices over there where their people are parking on the street all day long. And lately we've been having some conversations with the Red Chair restaurant, and they're frustrated because spots aren't opening up in front of their restaurant because there's no meters that far. So anyways, those are the things we need to talk about.
I would add to that, I think the neighbors would be supportive if there was some kind of a residential permit.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking at. You know, some kind of, you know, something, because you know, it's really been abused out.
Yeah,
abused on the
as you get closer to Gamble, people would be willing. They just want a place to park if they live there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, the hotel loading zone issue, does that require a code change?
It does.
Would you be willing, I mean, maybe this is what you were getting at, but I really like the idea of going to 3 hours, for example. Yeah, I mean, if you could bring some kind of omnibus ordinance that had several of these things you want, and if you guys could drive that and bring us legislative language, I think we would be very receptive to that.
And we've been working with Chris on this for like 2 or 3 months. So we've got we've got 2 or 3 items that I think the assembly could tweak and help with parking enforcement, and yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I would love to have something in your parking world that I could stab at, which will make my neighbors feel like I'm doing my job, while at the same time supporting your mission. So help me help you.
And Mrs. France?
I just wanted to add that when people complain to me about the high cost of parking downtown, I tell them they need to be sure to park at Easy Park, because the other one is not so reasonably priced.
Thank you.
And we reinvest in our community.
Lots of reasons to go with Easy Park.
So just looking at time, Mr. Wilbur, did you want to finish up all of these today?
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have time. No, I think one of the things that we're gonna have to do is I'd like to keep advancing. I'm not sure how you feel about this, but we do have a work session scheduled on the 30th to deal with, to address fire, homelessness, and then to talk about ML&P, but on not on a budget matter, on a different matter. That would be the option that comes to my mind. The challenge of that is whether or not we're going to have ML&P people available there to do that. So I think we can get through the port, solid waste, and Merrill Field in the next 30 minutes, but I don't think we'll be able to get through all of ML&P unless there's really not much to mention about ML&P. We're going to run it like we own it until we don't.
All right, let's do it.
Thanks. Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Steve, Port of Alaska. Excellent question. Never heard. This little harbor down at the end of the road here.
You're in rare form.
I'm telling you, man. Let's get it done. All right. So on the Port of Alaska, on their operating side, I don't know if there's anything highlighted to be changing here. Charges to the other departments, they're going to make some changes there. And then the MUSA, the contribution to MUSA is going to go down a little bit, as well as the depreciation. The position count is not changing down at the port. And based on the conversation that we've had with AWU, and I think some of them what France brought up, and the differentiation and how the ACDAs, in our responses to the questions that we are getting, we'll try to do our best, and we'll put Alex on a simple explanation of depreciation. So we'll just put that in the mix. Outside report on the operating side, I really don't have anything to add on their operations in big changing world. As we have talked about, when you look at a department and you don't include depreciation, they look a lot better financially than but the way that we illustrated here in their revenues expenses. It looks like they are in a deficit here, and so that's about $7 million of that $22 million is depreciation for the Port of Alaska. Don't know if I have anything I wanted to highlight here except their debt to equity is kind of flipped for most people. Their debt is they're in better shape. Their debt is lower in a percentage than their equity, so that's not a bad thing. But I would say that again, they might be in a negative situation, but the projections when you look out over time, the port is getting better.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? You said of the net loss here, $7 million of that is depreciation. So it's still a net loss.
Yep. On the revenues and expense side, and if I misspeak, Steve or Cheryl, please jump in, okay? I think one of the things that pops out to the reader here is the non-operating revenue, the interest income loss, the change. It shows 168% change. So I'm looking at the top, about the fifth line down. Those numbers actually, those are numbers that we get in as it relate to the information we get from public finance. So that 200, so the amount that their pro forma in 19 was almost $760,000. In 2019, what we had budgeted was $200,000. So the change is $300,000. So their proposed income in their investments is going to be up substantially based on where they have their interest income. So that's it's a lot of money, but for them, again, it's just a big number that pops up, and that's the reason why. And I go all the way down to the bottom. I mean, the difference between where they are last year and where they're proposing is $23,000. Not a big change in their overall appropriated budget, from $15 million to $15 million, $23,000 to $15 million, $46,000. Not a big significant change that's going on in the port.
I do have a question on this page, Ms. Alatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How does the tariffs and the current consideration of tariffs play into the projection on revenue for the port moving into 2020? Because that's an unsettled question at the moment.
Yeah, the tariff exercise, the tariff update exercise that we're going through now was not factored into the revenues that you see in this budget here, because you haven't approved them yet. But a first quarter adjustment will probably take into account what we're projecting for that once the Assembly's approved the tariff rate structure that we're proposing, and we can forecast what's going to come out as a consequence of that.
So
but they're not in this one right now.
So this is based on like flat current tariff.
This is based on what the current rate structure is.
If I can add on to Steve's comment about the change in the tariffs. When we built this budget, the conversation about the rate tariffs wasn't in our world in OMB. Unlike the rate structure, proposed rate changes for solid waste services and the proposed rate changes for development services. When we built, we knew generally what they were going to look like. Obviously, the numbers are going to adjust, but that's why we included those revenues in our proposed budget, because they were further enough along, and had the Assembly made a different decision not to include those, then we would adjust it. But as it relates to the port, the conversation about tariff adjustments, they weren't in our world in September when we put this together.
Thank you. A few more questions. Mr. Littleton.
That was my question, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Why is the port functioning constantly at an operating loss?
We've never had an issue paying our bills before, and I'm challenged by the difference between what accounting tells you you're doing and what reality tells you you're doing.
Okay. So, yeah, and I think what you're going to see is that is, I think, in effect, to the depreciation. So Steve is right, because I also think you're going to see the same thing inside Merrill Field. You know, when we count their depreciation, while Merrill Field has made some other adjustments, but for the operating side on the revenue, it's that depreciation that I think that kicks them at least to the fourth. But we'll look into that and get back to this in detail as Alex wants to.
Mr. Chair, one thing that is in there is they're spending $3 million a year suing NARAD for $100 million. So you take that $3 million a year away, plus the depreciation away from there, no longer.
So just an operation, if you factor out depreciation, is it operating at a loss or not? So you're not spending more money than you're earning.
Correct.
That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Except for attorneys, which are a never-present factor, it seems. So I had a very interesting email last night that raised a question that I have no idea how to answer. And it's one that probably you have a good answer for, Mr. Slipka, Mr. Buffalo. The code, I think, states that the Port Commission promulgates the rates for the tariff, and the Assembly adopts. When you look at the verb under the administrative code for what the word promulgate means, it means they enact, right? That's what promulgate means under the administrative code, is they enact. Do we then only have a ministerial role over that question when it then comes before us? Is that rate in effect the day they voted or the day they have a final resolution? What's the actual legal act that creates the tariff? Is it their promulgation, which if you look at that verb, that's what it is, or is it some other method?
I will tell you what we have historically done, verbs aside.
Right.
We have the Port Commission approves what they believe is the proper tariff structure to put in place. They write a resolution recommending to the Assembly approval of that tariff. We put nothing in force until the Assembly approves it, in spite of that word.
That word.
That's the practice
in the
that we've
code.
always done.
And so it may be, and I sent this to the attorneys, what the hell does this mean?
Yeah.
Because the plain reading of the English is not what we're doing. And so practice might not be quite legal.
I think that both Mr. Falsey and Ms. McPherson will weigh in on the appropriate practice. I think what Steve said is probably what we will do. But
And maybe we need a code change for one word, because there certainly is a point of law that could be argued, because the administrative books say what that word means. Anyhow, thank you.
But as a city department, we haven't overstepped our authority.
You know,
and done stuff without your permission.
Absolutely
and,
not.
And won't.
Yeah.
Have no intention.
Agreed. I just wonder if there's a structural problem there, or if it was intended to be that way and we haven't been operating it that way. It's strange.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you mind going back to the revenue, expense, and loss? Because when I subtract out the depreciation, there's still a difference of 1.3 million. And if that's the legal piece, which is where is that money coming from then?
it's coming out of their budget.
Out of savings?
Yeah, out of their cash. They have actual cash in the bank that they've been spending down.
Okay.
You think about this legal issue, which is going on for some time. I think they're now at break even. They've spent roughly $23 million.
I think this year we've begun to spend more than we've collected back to date.
Right.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Can I just follow up on that?
Sure.
Because I think that's your projected net. Does that factor in your legal fees as well?
Yes.
Okay. So your projected net shows if you continue to depreciate the same rate that you will, if you factor out that you will begin to show a net gain in 2022. Is that right?
And what we have assumed, because of where we are in the progression of this litigation, the likelihood is very high that this will either get settled in 2020 or go to trial first quarter of 2020, which may go into 2021. But we are forecasting that these legal expenses, the last year we'll have to do them is 2021. And beyond that, it's done. So that, as Alex mentioned, that almost $3.5 million a year in some instances that we pay for legal fees won't have to come out anymore.
And that's why you show a significant change in your net in 2022. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's see any other questions.
Do you have any questions on our capital program? This spectrum was not part of this one, but they're basically making sure that people can put improvements to the docks.
Yeah, nothing related to the planned modernization program, capital program in 2020 is here because you've approved all that already.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Then the Merrill Field. Merrill Field. It's a lot like the port.
So let's see Representative Rogers.
So for Merrill Field, we've had a couple, a little bit of changes here. The big changes that, some changes in the charges to, some truing up in their salaries and adjustments as it relates to charges to grants. And so some of the cleanup that we've been doing there is reflected in the proposed 2020 budget. The detail about that is not illustrated here, but that is why it looks like a significant amount of money for 9 people. It's just a modification of what we're doing on the grant side of the house. Outside their NISA contribution, there's no significant changes there. And I think, the non-labor, adjustments to non-labor to spending, that's in part in relation to some of the grant stuff, but just a matter of doing some scrubbing, cleaning up inside their budget, which we've been working with grant accounting and OMB and Ralph and Amy to do in the last many months, but we've been helping them do that. So on the operating side, running the airfield, I don't think there's any big things going on there. On their 8-year summary, similar to the conversations that we just had about the port, it looks like the Merrill Field is running in a deficit, and while they've made some rate changes and the revenue expenses, it's not easy to decipher in this the way this is illustrated. But Ralph and his team, their deficit's probably going to be between 50 and 200,000, and some of the rate changes that they've made, they're going to be creeping that piece out. And so as those changes come into play, but again, we can decipher that for you, and so that the reports that we've been giving you, that Ralph has been giving you at the Enterprise Utilities Committee, we can break that down for you, but it's not easily illustrated in this sheet right here. So this is where you've been doing it. Again, it shows the rate increases that you approved in 19 that take effect in 20. The rate increase of about 12% of all of those particular things. You can see the increases there, so we reflected that in this piece here. And I don't know, a little non-budgetary issue, but I think a very important piece that's kind of the last item on there. If you look at the ranked airports in the nation, they're inside the top 100, and they've been that way for a very long time. They're a busy place, very busy place. So unless you have some questions about, I just wanted to point out the rate changes and then the conversation that we've had with the port about their.
I do have some questions on this one.
Operations.
Mr. Weddleton.
Well, it's interesting if this is based on assumptions or reality. If you have a 12% rate increase and we were told by people that they would be leaving because you have way outpriced yourself, but you're assuming on into the future basically the same. You can look at the bottom lines there. Is that number of spaces or actual?
What numbers are you looking at, Mr.
Just the bottom 4, number of based aircrafts, tie downs. Is that how many you have or how many are being rented?
So the actual number of spaces are not going to change.
Oh, that's the number of spaces.
Yeah.
So if you lost customers with the rate change,
Through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, we haven't had a net loss of aircraft customers.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
That's a very
We're
good,
gonna leave.
a very good question by Mr. Weddleton, and it illustrates a point that I also want to reiterate. This budget's a little bit difficult to read, to understand what's exactly happening, because there's so many grants and that kind of thing. But you said it's between $50,000 and $200,000.
I'll verify, but I think that is their net operating loss.
But they're improving that, which is great. How is that being plugged at the moment? Are there general funds being paid into it?
No general funds. They'll be operating into a deficit, and if they have a savings, that would be where it comes from. But no general funds go to run the airport.
Great, and I just want to reiterate, thank you for continuing to do that and bringing those rate increases, because I am extremely unwilling to ask the rent payers and the property tax payers of my district, the vast majority of whom do not own planes, to use property tax money to subsidize this airport. So I really appreciate that you have been able to avoid making that ask to us yet. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Through the chair, one of the guest speakers at our assemblies this past summer suggested that I become more entrepreneurial to cover expenses. I would just like to report that in the last month I have rented out 12 of 18 spaces that were getting $5 a day, or if a 135 operator came into the airport and was there less than 6 hours, paid nothing, and I now have 12 of those rented out at $90 a month. So I continue to look for ways to make sure that I don't have to raise rates unless there's an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Can you just give me an explanation for the $169,000 reduction in airport property rental, and then an explanation for where the proposed is? So you went from $528,000 this year, and it was reduced by 169, and then your projected. I'm sorry. That's I guess there's two questions. Why is there a reduction in that, and then what's the sort of projected for the next year? So I'm looking at page 25 at the top under operating revenue, airport property rental.
Okay.
You've got a change of 169,000.
Yep.
32% reduction, and I guess I'm wondering both about why that reduction is happening and what's the sort of the future of that. Is that going to grow?
If I may, through the chair. So what happened is when we were going through the scrub of the budget, what commitment items were truly receiving what dollars throughout the years, we uncovered that there is a grant that our field receives from USGS. They rent one of our buildings. And so that item is being included in the airport property rental line item, and that wasn't an appropriate place to put those dollars. So we truly brought that commitment GL line item to airport property rentals only, and moved that grant down to a grant receipt line item where it appropriately should be.
Okay. And then do you foresee that proposed revenue holding firm there, or changing in the future?
That is going to, the 2020 proposed number of the $359,000 reflects the increase that will happen on January 1st that you all saw. Beyond that, we project that will be consistent.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Back on the topic of the loss of potential rentals, I was recently witness to a legal conversation between parties about the transfer of a Lake Hood gravel parking spot in an estate. It was a battle between family members because you can't get them, right? And so like they're fighting over these items because there just isn't capacity. So it's very unlikely we're going to see any reduction anytime in the future.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your entrepreneurial spirit. Lance, a question. For all the enterprise and utilities, I mean, to Mr. Dunbar's point, I thought they're all independent. We don't use any general government funds to support any of them, and that we probably could not do that. Or maybe there would be a way for the muni to provide a loan or something, but we couldn't take tax dollars to fund any of these operations.
I'll look into it. I don't know if there is a prohibition.
Okay.
I will look into it, but I mean, they're enterprise. It's like they're a business that they're expected to run on self-sustaining.
It is a misconception that's out there a little bit because people will come up and say, I can't believe my tax dollars are supporting a port or Merrifield or something like that. Say, no, those are separate. They have their own revenues. They're self-sustaining, and so on.
I will make a note of that. One of the things that I'm working on is a simple, try to explain $540 million front and back of a leaflet, and I will add that to that. And so I'll add sort of the budget very, very simply that, as it comes to the enterprise utilities, if that's the one thing that we tell the taxpayers, that their tax money doesn't go there, maybe that would be, it's good to know. Okay?
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I was sometimes that line gets a little blurry, right? Like, for example, the fire department paying AWU for the, ostensibly they're getting a service, but it's a service that nobody else uses, and it's millions of dollars. But I think I generally agree with what Ms. LaFrance just said. Have you given any thought to, just given the unique sort of physical plan of Merrill Field, how is that going to interact with a stormwater utility if we create one? Are you going to pay rates?
I don't know if we know that yet.
You have a very large impermeable surface. One of the largest in the city.
I don't know if we know.
What's that?
Isn't that why we hired a consultant?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess just thinking off the top of my head, you do pay a small MISA, right? Or MISA. So if we were looking to keep your budget in balance, that might be one way to.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the answer to that question probably would be the same answer to the other utilities in enterprise.
Yeah. The other utilities and enterprises, though, are much larger in terms of revenue. You seem to have a unique situation where you are very large and impermeable and have relatively small revenue compared to AWU, for example, or even the port. So.
I have no more questions.
All right. So on their capital side, their capital budget, they got a lot of, they have a big hit of FAA money, and Ralph's working on that. So as far as their capital program, their focus is to make sure that they're getting back to a healthy equity with what they've got. So that's a one-liner in that. All right, Mr. Chairman, it's like, thank you. Let's get some questions on capital.
Well, I was a little surprised because part of the rate increase was to get match for the huge federal, or you did what did we do? You did something to get cans or?
That was for 18 and 19 projects.
Okay, so that's why it's not here. Did you get that? I wasn't sure.
Through the chair, so the FAA has approved all of the grant requests that we brought to the Assembly. In order to create a piggy bank for future matching requirements, I've pushed out several of the items that have been previously brought to the Assembly until 2024 or whenever we can build up matching funds to cover those. So that's why there's nothing for 2020. We're using the 1.65 million. We're not going to exceed that 1.65 million. If something pops up, I'm going to take it out of that, but that's why there's nothing for 2020.
Thanks. Thank you. All right, that's it.
Yeah, I think we're about out of time. I don't think we can do solid waste justice if we try to cram it in 2 minutes. So we're going to have to either continue this or find another time to do solid waste and MLP. So we'll get Desiree and get some time to do it.
Okay.
Here.
We'll talk about that. We'll figure it out. All right. Thank you.